evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's been 3 weeks since we disappeared because of all the leadership things. But on the Sunday, on the third week, we rose again. That's a little bit of an Easter joke to start the night off. We got a lot to talk about. Today is March 31st, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We're doing our roundup of the week, and there's so much. Oh, this one is going to be a spicy one, folks. I think we're probably going to be getting some emails on this one because we're going to lean right into it towards the end. But before we do, as always, we're going to go through the smaller stories first, the lighter stories, if you will. And then we'll get into the really big, heavy deep dives and such. But want to be really, really clear. Once we're done our program proper, we're absolutely going to open it up to the spaces on the Twitter machine. So if you have a mobile device, if we say something throughout the course of this show, you don't like it, you disagree with it, or if maybe we missed something during the course of the show that you feel was very important, then you can absolutely weigh in with your thoughts once we get through the program proper on a mobile device. Apparently Spaces still doesn't work on tablets or computers because technology is hard for Elon Musk, I guess. But let's get started right out of the gates. Because there were some things we gotta talk about. And the very, very first one has to do with some controversy, if you will. There's been a lot of debate that's gone on. We actually got called out by a UCP press secretary, I think, employee, because there were some numbers around the encampment processing facility. And I want to be clear, we make a lot of jokes about the encampment processing facility that's in Edmonton, but we also saw the recent announcement from Jason Nixon and Danielle Smith and the chief of police of Edmonton that they're going to be expanding those facilities. It's not just going to be a homeless/houseless processing facility in Edmonton. They're going to do it in Calgary too. So that's great. And as much as we do make jokes about it, because there's some things in regards to this whole thing that are pretty gross, tearing up and destroying encampments, the misrepresentation of what's been going on in encampments, the fear mongering that's been going on around the homeless and the houseless population. All of these are very, very bad things. But one of the big questions that's come around is how many people has this processing facility actually helped? Because the idea behind the processing facility in and of itself, if you remove we're going to forcibly take homeless people's and houseless people's tents and possessions and destroy them and throw them in the garbage, and then we're going to take them to this processing facility. If you ignore that part, which you probably shouldn't, then you get to the reality that these facilities do have a boatload of different agencies involved. And the idea is, if you have all of these agencies in one place, then maybe you can get some people plugged into some of these services. Maybe you can remove some of the barriers for people. So that's the idea behind it. But one of the big questions is, how well has this been working? Well, there was a budget thing where NDP MLA Janice Irwin was asking some questions of the tall Jason Nixon. Jason Nixon does not like having questions asked of him. He did not approve. He said a very defensive, let's go with tone right out of the gates. And in fact, he kicked the numbers question to his deputy minister, who was very, very clear about what the numbers are. And while there are some people that have been plugged into different services, there's been some referrals made. All of those are good things. When it comes down to the actual number of people who have been put into actual housing, not just shelter spaces, not just shuffled around the board a little bit, but when it comes down to the actual number of people who have been put into actual housing, it's not great.
Navigation and Support Center, people are being housed both by the housing workers and directly through the shelter. And once they leave the center, we're not sort of tracking at that point. We leave that to our shelters and CBOs to do. However, as of last Friday, There's a few categories. So I'm just going to go through them all. 5 people have been housed, 1 through coordinated access, 4 by the Hope teams directly at the center. There's 220 referrals to coordinated access, 42 people have been accepted, and all are connected to a housing team. There were 127 access and eligible for intensive case management team for housing. 6 were eligible for supportive housing and 30 were assessed as eligible for rapid rehousing. And then everybody else who's gone through the center has gone into a shelter or a longer term transitional shelter.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that data. And it's absolutely, I'll make it very clear, it's no criticism of anybody working on the front lines. They are doing all they can with limited resources, but the number just shared is 5, right? 5 out of the 5 that were housed. That's the number that was shared at the beginning, and then other people are provided services. I'm trying to get some clear data. So I would like some clarity, perhaps if the ADM would like to come up again, because the notes that we took as she was speaking, it said that 5 folks have been housed. There have been 220 referrals, 42 have been accepted into housing first, 127 have been eligible for intensive casework. The reality is 5 people have been housed. And again, this is no criticism. Allow me to continue.
No,
Madam Chair.
Here's the thing, actually.
I would love some clarity from the ADM. Okay.
That was Jason Nixon in the background. He didn't like when people were actually breaking down the numbers like his ADM did, because that's where you get down to the number of only 5 people have been placed in permanent housing. But there it is. That's the tape. That's the number from Jason Nixon's own ADM. 5 people in housing, a bunch of other people getting referrals, and that's great, to be clear. But it's only 5 people have been put into housing. Moving on from there, and this is a bit of the pre-show that we're gonna do tonight, because the theme of Take Back Alberta is gonna kind of run a little bit of a current through the show tonight, because we're starting with Take Back Alberta, and as many people would probably argue, we're kind of ending with Take Back Alberta for a little bit of our deep dive. But Take Back Alberta, they've got some problems. Particularly executive director, supreme chancellor. I'm not sure what the term is that he's using now. But David Parker has got himself into hot water with Elections Alberta. He is unwilling to provide. He says he's refusing. He will not do it because laws are meant to be not followed or something. But he's refusing to provide Elections Alberta with his donor list because he says that the contributors, the big donors, the powerful donors, they weren't donating for political advertising. They were donating because they believe in the greater cause of Take Back Alberta, and just because maybe a bunch of different things that David Parker has done with Take Back Alberta constitute advertising. We'll talk about that in a sec. That doesn't mean that the donors should be held responsible for how David Parker chose to spend the money that they donated. It gets very confusing very quickly. From this article here, David Parker says they want everything. They want every financial transaction. They want receipts for every meeting that we've had, he said in an interview Thursday, adding that the records being requested date back to February 2022 are in regard to more than 100 events held by Take Back Alberta last year. But of course, there's more. And from Press Progress, who also did a story on this, Press Progress spells out the rules very, very clearly in their story. All donations over $250 to a third-party political organization, or a TPA, must be reported to Elections Alberta with the donor names, which are posted publicly online, which is good because accountability is important. Right, Davey? Donations can go as high as $30,000. So the limits that exist for TPAs are not anywhere near as low as the limits that exist for political parties. For political parties, it's like a sixth of that. And those all donations as well are published too. So when you're giving even more money to organizations that are attempting to influence government or the public through advertising, it makes sense with limits up to $30,000 that you'd want to have that accountability still present. Elections Alberta has the power to levy fines for violations of the rules. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because Parker actually admits in a story to Press Progress, he admits that there are large donors who have contributed in the thousands. So, a couple things to be clear of. Donors, plural, And these are people who have contributed thousands and thousands of dollars, because thousands is pluralized, to Take Back Alberta. He says that he's not going to tell anybody who those donors are. So the people who are bankrolling Take Back Alberta, which has taken over the UCP, that gets a lot relevant later, I promise. The people who are bankrolling that, he doesn't believe that they should have to be disclosed because he wants to protect them with secrecy, as is the practice of transparency that we see from Take Back Alberta. The quote from the article: "I wouldn't want to be naming those donors if I was Elections Alberta," Parker said. "It's a dangerous game messing with the powerful." Ooh, so there are people who are above the law just because they're powerful. Fascinating choice from David Parker, who was involved with supporting the convoy. He was involved with the efforts to remove Jason Kenney for putting in health measures during, reluctantly, I might add, during the pandemic. But powerful people, they should be above consequence. They should be above the law. It's almost as if he's worried that they won't keep giving him money if everybody finds out who they are. But let's talk a little bit about the history of Take Back Alberta. When it comes to advertising, David Parker says, no, we've never done political advertising. And yet, if you go to their, oh dear, look at their Facebook page. Oh gosh, there's a bunch of stuff going on here, because here we have Take Back Alberta not only advertising in 2022. Again, this would be during the period that Elections Alberta is reportedly asking for documentation. Here we have a Facebook ad where Take Back Alberta is dunking on Travis Taves during the leadership race. It's become clear that Travis Taves is the man carrying the Jason Kenney banner. We believe it is imperative that all people responsible for Jason Kenney's disastrous COVID policies are held, and just really savor this next word, accountable for their actions. Vote who you want, but know this: Travis Taves made the decisions that made you a second-class citizen. Taves equals more Jason Kenney. Well, that seems like a political advertisement. We also have from just February of this year, I support the withdrawal from the Canadian Pension Plan in favor of Alberta establishing its own pension plan via referendum to be held no later than September 24. Sign the petition. So not only is it data mining, but it's a Facebook ad that's data mining to the tune of, according to Facebook, they spent at least $1,000 to $1,500 on that ad promoting the Alberta pension plan. But just in case you were really unsure as to whether or not they've been promoting specific political parties or engagement with specific political parties, we can go to the ad in the middle here. Help us reach our new goal to Take Back Alberta, 15,000 new UCP memberships. This is your last chance to shape the race to choose the UCP leader and elect a freedom-friendly premier to replace Jason Kenney's authoritarian regime. And then they have the links to buy membership. That ad from August of 2022. So there's no question. There can't really be any doubt that Take Back Alberta has absolutely been engaging in political advertising. And they're using money to pay for that advertising, money that they receive from donors. Now, these are just a couple of the ads that they put up on Facebook. There's more if you go to the library. But there's also other ways that you can do advertising. And Elections Alberta is making the argument that one of the ways that Take Back Alberta has been doing this advertising is by holding the meetings and advocating for certain issues and advocating against the NDP during an election period, which is, of course, taking a position. So it doesn't really seem to be. I mean, I'm no lawyer. I'm no Elections Alberta person. But there doesn't really seem to be any debate that Take Back Alberta has been engaging in political spending and political advertising. But what's their reporting been like? If only there was some sort of website you could go to where you could see the transparency that Take Back Alberta has offered throughout their inception as a third-party advertiser. Oh, wait, there is. We can go to the Elections Alberta website where we can see the contribution reports that have been put forth since Take Back Alberta was registered as a third-party advertiser. They were first registered in 2022 with David Parker as the primary contact and David Parker as the chief financial officer, which is kind of weird. That's probably a website glitch because when you actually take a look at the filings for 2022, we can see very, very clearly who filled out the paperwork. And that's none other than everybody's favorite Coots Blockade former city councilor, Marco van Hugenbos. And we can see if we take a look at the statement for the third-party advertiser, it was not a good year in 2022. Their revenue is $22,309. Their expenses, which are a fascinatingly round number, $40,500. So Take Back Alberta ran a deficit. They were in debt at the end of 2022 to the tune of $18,191. Now let's take a look at what their donations were like for 2022. And it turns out, it appears that in fact there were there was only one donor in 2022 who donated in the thousands, and that's David Parker. He donated to Take Back Alberta $12,500. And then he also donated $249 for a grand total of $12,749. Darcy Wildeman from Wainwright donated $500. So that's where the recordable donations came from. Now, apparently there were $9,060 that were donated in total from contributions under the $250 limit. Those don't have to be reported by name. But let's take a look at the 2023 filing. Because again, if we go back to the Elections Alberta, we can see that in 2023, they didn't file their quarter 4 on time. They didn't file their quarter 1 on time, but we do have their quarterly contributions report. What does that say? In the name of transparency, in the name of ethics, in the name of accountability, why they received allegedly $0 for the entire year. So the entire year of 2023, where David Parker was traveling the province, the entire year where David Parker was putting on events, they received no money. And I want to be really, really clear. I'm not just talking about the contributions, $250 and over. I'm talking about all of the monies. David Parker submitted a report to Elections Alberta claiming that in 2023, Take Back Alberta did not take in a single penny. Gosh, I wonder why he's under investigation for something like that. It's super, super duper weird how David Parker would continue to travel the province and hold major events like having, a certain psychologist come to Alberta, or having a certain, I think he's a mathematician, come to Alberta to talk about the evils of communism or something. No revenue, no money was taken in. There were no apparent expenses for 2023. Now, where it gets really, really interesting is the end of year filing for Take Back Alberta is due. Once again, we're recording this on March 31st. April 2nd, 2024, Mr. Parker has 2 days to provide paperwork demonstrating how Take Back Alberta did all the things they did in 2023 with apparently no expenses and also no donations. Totes seems legit. Not really. Doesn't actually seem all that legit. Moving on from there, we're going to do a little bit of an update on the Grassy Mountain situation. Grassy Mountain is, of course, the old coal mine that was shut down decades ago and then bought by Benga, which is an Australian company, in the hopes of restarting that coal mine and maybe doing some selenium poisoning to the water table for southern Alberta. No way to say for sure, but the odds were good. And the entire province went, whoa, you're doing what now? And the UCP had to put in some protections. The application was actually denied. And as we talked about on our last live episode, which was 3 weeks ago, as we talked about on the last live episode, that was denied not just by the feds, it was also denied by the province. And it was denied because the environmental costs were not worth the financial gain that Alberta might see. Now, since then, there's been some new developments. We talked on our last live episode about all of the money that Banga, which isn't called Banga anymore, they changed their name to Northback. See, it's different because they changed their name tag. So it's totally different. It's not different. But they've been pumping all kinds of money into the area directly around the mine site because they're trying to sway public opinion. But they're not just trying to sway public opinion with the folks in the area. They're also very, very clearly lobbying the provincial government quite aggressively. The Tyee ran this story where they talked about the sound bites that Daniel Smith has been using. Sound an awful lot like the sound bites that the CEO of Northback has been using. So let's take a look at what Smith has recently said about the Grassy Mountain Mine.
Energy Minister, I believe, wrote a letter to the CEO of the Alberta Energy Regulator, including a clarification that those 4 projects could still be pursued. So what's going on? Why does this thing just keep coming back? Are we going to have a hard black and white decision, yes or no, on development?
Well, there were 4 advanced projects that had been under consideration. And then the change was made to the coal policy, which I think caused a lot of backlash and anger, because the 1976 coal policy had a whole vast areas that were off limits for development. When it got rescinded, then there were a number of different companies that were going onto pristine land and starting to do some of the initial work to determine whether they could develop. So we reinstituted the coal policy, but there were still those 4 advanced projects that were excluded from that policy because they'd already been disturbed. I think there's a couple up in the Hinton Grand Cache area. There's Tent Mountain and there's Grassy Mountain. And
so hesitant to use the word, but grandfathered would be sort of an application here.
It would, because if you go down and look at those sites, they'd already been disturbed, they'd already been developed, there's already existing infrastructure there, and quite frankly, when they were decommissioned, they were not reclaimed particularly well. And so I think there's been some appetite in the community to get them reclaimed properly and to reconsider whether or not they should also be mined at the same time. So that's why those 4 projects had been given a carve-out when the new coal policy came back in, to see whether there was some local support to be able to reopen them, finish the mining, and then reclaim them properly. So we're just letting the process proceed, and wanted to make sure that the AER knew that they could continue looking at those as 4 advanced projects, that there wasn't an intention for that to be part of the reinstatement of the 1976 coal policy. So I'll just let that play out, and they'll have to see if they can get public support, if they can address the environmental issues. Anytime we have a major project, they have to have all of those considerations.
So first of all, let's be clear. Nope. Most of that is absolutely not true. The project was denied by the province, by the federal government. Period. End of sentence. At that point, it was dead and gone. The proposals that Northback has aren't to restart the mine. They haven't submitted any proposals to the AER that say, hey, we'd really like to do this mining thing. What they've submitted is proposals for drilling to say, hey, we'd really like to do some drilling just to see if maybe there's some coal there. We don't know what we're going to do after that, which is obviously patently false. We don't have to look very much farther than some of Northback's own PR materials to see just how disingenuous that claim is. Because some of the materials that Northback has provided, they talk about legacy mining lands and land reclamation. They make the argument the Grassy Mountain project is not in pristine wilderness. Rather, it is located on an unreclaimed open pit mine and underground mining area that has been laying derelict and disturbed since it was abandoned decades ago by previous owners. It will only be restored if the project proceeds. Gosh, that sounds a lot like what Smith said. But again, there's no proposals before the AER right now for mining. There's proposals for drilling. That's an important distinction. Now, there is a little bit of a strange gray area that exists with this whole situation, because one of the things that's happened with the Grassy Mountain project is, in addition to all of the PR stuffs that have done, two of the First Nations that are present in the area that would be affected have said to the federal government, and they've gotten a judicial review, they've said we weren't consulted properly, and they're making the argument, and this is important to be clear on, they're making the argument that they would like the mine to go ahead because their areas are so economically devastated that this would be a way for them to get some money for their people, which is on its face absolutely tragic. When First Nations are saying, we're so screwed for cash and to be able to provide the resources that we want to be able to provide for the people who live on our nation, that we're going to endorse a project that both the province and the federal government has said, and I want to quote here, likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects. They've said they didn't get the consultation. They'd like to get the consultation, please. Once the consultation's done, then it becomes up to the federal government to make the decision as to whether or not they're going to reverse their decision about the mine, which they probably won't, let's be honest. Unless, of course, that process is able to be stretched out long enough that there's a federal election. And then maybe we get a new government at the federal level that maybe is going to be a little bit more friendly towards the company that wants to pursue a project that once again is going to be likely to cause significant, not just a little bit, significant adverse environmental effects. That's where we are. But even Stoney Nakoda First Nation, the law firm that represented them, they said, yeah, we're really not too sure what's going to happen next. So when Smith says, oh, they were grandfathered in, it's really important to realize the only reason that they were grandfathered in is because Minister of Energy Brian Jean wrote a letter to the AER saying these people should be grandfathered in. So it's not like there was some sort of carve-out that existed from day one. That's not what happened here. There's no question that Smith and the UCP intervened directly on Benga/Northback's behalf in order to get the drilling process going in the hopes that they can run out the clock on the federal government and maybe get the mine going. Meanwhile, Northback continues to dump thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and apparently have UCP MLAs at their disposal for PR announcements. So that's the situation with Grassy Mountain right now. Moving on from there, though, and this is something that we've gotten a few DMs about, which is kind of weird because normally municipal politics wouldn't be something that we spend a whole lot of time on this show, but yet again, it's appearing that the lines between municipal politics and provincial politics are starting to blur a little bit. Now, a lot of this started off where David Staples, who has no sort of a friendly relationship whatsoever with the UCP government. Nope, that's not a thing that exists. He wrote an article, a editorial piece, creative writing effort. I never know what to call Mr. Staples's literary endeavors. But he wrote a piece that came out on the morning of March 27th, where he said the province is considering the move to audit and stabilize the city of Edmonton. Now, this whole column got people quite concerned. There were a lot of questions as to why is David Staples saying that the provincial government is going to come in and take control of the city of Edmonton. That seems kind of not great, but fortunately, there was a press conference that Danielle Smith was at, and she was asked, so what's going on, Danny?
Clash with the city of Edmonton. And so anybody who's looking at this from the outside is going to say, oh, isn't that interesting that they want to intervene in the affairs of the city of Edmonton? I mean, have they posted a deficit? They're not allowed to under the law. So I'm just wondering, what would you say to people who are very suspicious about your government's motives here, and even having this message come out via a columnist?
Well, look, as I understand it, there was a pretty involved meeting at the council a number of days ago that talked about the financial challenges the city is facing. There's a number of people who were at that meeting, and a number of them started calling us, and so that's how we heard about it. But we're just letting the city know that we're on standby if the things that we're hearing are true, and if they need any assistance. And we've been watching the media as well, in seeing the exodus of senior officials over the last 12 months. That is unusual. And when you've got a major city that has the kind of budget and the kind of responsibility Edmonton does, and you lose 7 or 8 of your senior staff, and then you're hearing of meetings where they talk about very serious financial challenges, it would be irresponsible of me not to pay attention to that. So we're paying attention. We want the council to know, and the mayor to know, that we're on standby if they need to talk to us to be able to help them through this. No one stepped in. No one has intervened. No one is doing an audit. No one is taking any extraordinary measures. But if they need our help, then we're ready. We're ready and on standby to help.
Now, you got to love when you can tell that Dani's been taken a little bit off balance, because she takes that extra little bit of time at the beginning of her answer to kind of roll up the speed and get the momentum that she needs to plow through the last half. But there's some interesting things about her answer there. First of all, she's not wrong. There have been some problems in Edmonton. They had some financial issues with the budget in 2023. They just recently passed a record property tax increase. And there have been some pretty major resignations. Most recently, the resignation of the city manager, Andre Corbould, whose name is so very familiar to us here at The Breakdown, because he was one of the figures that was heavily involved in the mask scandal, where some people say it very much appeared that Adriana LaGrange directed, a couple $1 million. What's a few zeros between friends, to a acquaintance and donor, allegedly, in Red Deer, and bypassed a bunch of other companies that were actually offering masks for cheaper, so that she could push this money to that mask company. The only reason why the ethics commissioner didn't find that something untoward had happened was because everybody involved couldn't remember what happened. That was they rolled out the Reagan excuse of "I do not recall," and that's the only reason why the ethics commissioner could not find, on a balance of probabilities, that there was untowardness happening. So, Andre Corbould, he just resigned a couple days ago. So the city of Edmonton has had some problems, but there's different perspectives on what those different sources of the problems might be. And Edmonton City Councillor Michael Jans put up a social media post, and he made his feelings pretty clear.
Points to numerous examples of provincial costs being downloaded onto cities and towns, like, for example, less funding for infrastructure, taking a greater portion of photo radar revenue, and opting out of property tax payments for provincial buildings.
Edmonton doesn't need an audit. The provincial government needs a mirror. They need to take a look at how they're treating municipalities, not just Edmonton, not just Calgary, but look around. Municipalities across Alberta, infrastructure is crumbling because of provincial underfunding.
And in fact, Michael Jans has pointed out, as many other pundits have as well, that when you take a look at all of the provincial infrastructure that exists in the city of Edmonton, the legislature grounds are a good example, and all of the buildings in the area. That is prime, almost riverfront property. It is very, very close to the downtown core. It's got some great roadage that goes back and forth. And the province of Alberta has said, well, we could pay property taxes like everybody else in Edmonton who gets to use these spaces, or we could also just not. And the number that's been bandied around is that the province has said just nope to upwards of $60 million in property taxes to the city of Edmonton. So when we're talking about reasons why the city of Edmonton might have some budgetary concerns, not being able to get the province to pay their property tax kind of does sort of factor in a little bit. And one can't help but wonder whether or not the province, as it's standing by ready to assist in any way needed, would be willing to actually pay their property tax bill. So far, though, looks like the answer is a big nope. Moving on from there, and we're getting into the good stuff. We got 3 big topics left. And numbers 2 and 3, those are kind of the spicy ones. Might even have to get the cancel clock out. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. But we do have to talk about the NDP leadership race for a second. For those of you who have been following the show, you know that we have been doing our very, very best to try to get all of the NDP leadership candidates to come on the show, have a chat. And we're only missing one now. We've had chats with literally everybody who has said that they were going to run for NDP leadership, as well as the folks that have actually run for NDP leadership. We're trying to get Gil McGowan still. Gil's laptop apparently broke, so he's having some problems, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to sort it out fairly soon and get Gil on the show, because we do want to make sure that we afford everybody the same platform. And get the same conversations. We have our list of questions that we're working through. And one of the fun conversations, from a personal standpoint, speaking only for myself and not anyone else affiliated with the show, one of the fun conversations that I really enjoyed was the conversation with Raki Pancholi. She is a mind at work. There's no question. She's a very, very fast talker. She's got a firm grasp of the issues. And in her campaign, she was one of the people that was like, you want policies? I got the policies. And she was firing off policies left, right, and center. So it came as a surprise to many, given the intensity with which she ran her campaign, that she announced on March 26th that she would be stepping down. She would be exiting the NDP leadership race. And her reasons for doing so were pretty clear.
All Alberta NDP leadership candidates received updated membership sales numbers from the party, the first such update since Naheed Nenshi entered the race. Those numbers show that in the span of a week, Naheed has more than doubled the size of the Alberta NDP's membership. It's an incredible accomplishment and invites so many more people into our movement. Growing our party has always been and will continue to be my first priority. Rather than compete with each other, I want to unite us behind our shared vision and mutual goals. So today, I'm announcing that I will be ending my campaign to be leader of the Alberta NDP. We must move forward to offer a positive alternative to the UCP that Albertans can enthusiastically support in the next election. And I believe that means uniting behind the next leader, Naheed Nenshi.
Pretty clear. A lot to unpack on that one. I don't think anybody can underplay the significance of the statement that all of the leadership candidates received membership updates. And in the week since Naheed Nenshi entered the race, he doubled not just the sales so far, he doubled the membership of the NDP. That's a tremendous feat. And I think, speaking again only for myself, I think it's really quite impressive is the word that I'm going to use, that Raki Pancholi made the decision to recognize the direction that things were going and her campaign. And when she did that, she also did a very good job of making sure that she's got a voice at the table going forward, because she announced immediately after that, in fact, she had become the executive chair for Naheed Nenshi's campaign. Now, as people have speculated, maybe this was all part of the plan from day one. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate at all, particularly if you go back and listen to the conversation that we had with Raki Pancholi. She was in it, and she was in it to win it. And one of the big things that she stressed in that conversation was the importance of growing the NDP past where it has historically sort of fixed itself. And it makes perfect sense given the writing on the wall, and that Naheed Nenshi's demonstrating that he's already executed on that goal. It makes perfect sense for her to make sure that she secures a voice within that silo so that she can do exactly that. And she can't be faulted for it because she's adhering to the goals that she set out. But it's also a huge statement to the NDP membership and to the rest of the leadership candidates, because many people were looking at Rocky as one of the front runners. The two names that many people bandied about were, well, it's either going to be Nenshi and Rocky, or it's going to be Nenshi and Hoffman. That's what a lot of people were saying. Well, with Rocky moving all of her support, which was substantial, to Naheed Nenshi, it's not a small thing. Going to be interesting to see how it plays out. We're going to try to continue to, we really do. Gil, if you're watching, we would love to have you on. And we're going to continue our tepid coverage of the NDP leadership race as we go. But moving on from there, we also saw a saga unfold as earlier in the week, and it literally was earlier in the week. This is March 26th. Danielle Smith invited herself. She's very, very good at that. She's very good at inviting herself to things. She invited herself to the Standing Committee on Finance, which is the federal committee that would have the most say over the carbon tax. And she said, I would like to appear at this thing that you're doing on, I think it was 2 days later. Yeah, she was requesting to testify. It wasn't even that there was a scheduled meeting. Forgive me. She was requesting that the committee chair recall the committee so that Danielle Smith could go and testify about how evil the carbon tax is, which is a pretty bold move because it's the March holiday season, and in particular the weekend leading up to this April 1st would have been the Easter weekend. So people are out, people are away. But Danielle Smith really wanted to have her public say, and she didn't get it. But what did happen was equally kind of weird. So Kelly McCauley, who is the member of Parliament for Edmonton West, he is the chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. And he said that, you know what, even though my committee isn't the one that's responsible for the carbon tax, I would love to hear from the Conservative premiers as a member of the Conservative Party of Canada. So he did. And Danielle Smith's response was really bizarre, because here you have Kelly McCauley, who is the chair of the federal committee and the federal committee for the government. And Danielle Smith's response was, it's incredibly disappointing that the federal government will not hear from so many provincial premiers that are opposed to the carbon tax and the economic difficulties it forces to families across the country, including right here in Alberta. So she's got a guy who says, hey, you can come be on my committee. And she says, I wish that I could be on a committee, and it's so sad that I can't. It's very strange. I've read this tweet like 6 times looking for a different interpretation. Can't find it. But she did. She went to Ottawa. She made a production of it. And when I say she went to Ottawa, she did so virtually. So it only kind of counts. But turned some good social media fodder out of it. She appeared on the 28th, 2 days later. It's pretty fast. And provided the link to the committee, saying, tune in now. It's time to stop the carbon tax. This morning, I'm testifying to Parliamentary Committee on the dangers to our economy if the federal carbon tax is raised further. You can watch the live stream here. And then she's got her little Premier Shield thing that they did up, I guess, on Canva a while ago. And I suspect that while she was really excited to have all of the folks a-listening, there may have been a little bit of buyer's remorse later on in the committee hearings in regards to sharing that link publicly. Now, it's to be clear, the committee chair, he's a Conservative. And so the first couple of questions were fun. They were carbon taxy. One might say they were a little political. We'll play a couple. You can tell us what you think.
Who, as far as I know, is the only minister that has been in handcuffs and in an orange jumpsuit. Can you please speak a little bit about how dangerous his ideology is when it comes to our clean, responsible, low-carbon energy sector for Alberta and Canada's prosperity?
I should just make sure the committee knows exactly why Stephen Guilbeault faced law problems. One was for the stunt he pulled on the CN Tower. The other was that he climbed on the roof of our Premier, Ralph Klein, when his wife Colleen was home, terrifying her. So you can imagine how Albertans feel that this is the person now responsible for enacting emissions policy.
You know, the nice thing about Danielle Smith, she's made it very clear, especially when the question of Mr. Parker and his rhetoric came up. She does not engage in personal attacks. She engages in attacks on ideas. If she's going to debate someone, she's going to debate them on policy. She's not going to bring up things from decades past in order to try to demonize someone. That's not how Danny rolls. That wasn't the only question that the MP for Calgary, one of the MPs for Calgary, wanted to ask.
Just another blatant attack on Alberta?
Look, I know that the question has been raised about the Supreme Court decision on the carbon tax, and I believe that the Supreme Court decided in favor of the government on that because they were making the argument that it was such an important national issue, it needed to be dealt with in a national way, and the rules needed to apply equally across the country.
Now, this is where we're going to do a little bit of, we're going to use some literary techniques. We're going to go foreshadowing. The premise of the question becomes important because there we had the MP asking, do you believe that this is just another blatant attack on Alberta? And it's important that you take a little bit of time to digest that question because what the question is actually saying is there have been many blatant attacks on Alberta by Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault, because in order to have another blatant attack, you'd have to have at least one or two before then. So the question is what some people might call a loaded question. And it has a premise included in it that if it was somebody who was not in perfect alignment with those views, somebody might say something to the effect of, well, I'm not sure that the federal government has launched deliberate blatant attacks on the province of Alberta. We've certainly had our history of conflict, and there's certainly challenges with different views and different positions at times, but I don't know that I would say that it's a deliberate blatant attack. I have a lot of problems with it personally, but that's not what Danielle Smith said, because the question served her purposes. But as the hearing went on, the questions started to not serve her purposes nearly as much.
About affordability issues in Alberta and across the country. On the other hand, you are raising your gas tax by 4.5 cents. Does it come with a rebate for Albertans, very similar to how the price on pollution through the Canada Carbon Rebate will be giving $2,160 to rural Albertan families?
We eliminate it completely when the price goes above $90, which we did for 2 years. We will eliminate it again when it starts, when the price trends above 80. I'd in fact love to see the federal government do the same thing, that when gas prices are high, they take their tax off completely like we do, and when they're low, they bring it back on.
Sorry, Premier, I have a very limited time. So the answer is that there will be no rebate for Alberta families for the increase they will see on April 1st by 4.5 cents.
The Albertans will get it removed completely if gas prices remain high, and I'd love to see the federal government do the same.
So there is no rebate at the moment. Thank you.
As I said, the federal government could always follow our approach and remove it completely.
Now, there's some differences that exist there, because when you take a look at who gets the lion's share of money from oil and gas royalties, is it the federal government or is it the provinces? Oh, that's right. It's the provinces. So for Danielle Smith to say, hey, when we make a lot of money off of oil and gas royalties, when the price goes above $90 a barrel, then we'll get rid of the tax because we're making enough money that we can afford to. The federal government doesn't have the same mechanism, but I'd love it if they got rid of all of their taxes. There's a little bit of a flaw in the logic there, you see, because it's not even comparing apples to oranges. It's comparing apples to goldfish. They're two totally different programs that work in two totally different ways. But that was just the start of the challenges, because as it turns out, as much as Danielle Smith was super, super stoked to talk to this committee, apparently no one, recognizing it's a federal committee, so it's broadcast in both English and in French, apparently no one thought to explain to the premier or manage for the premier how Zoom works.
Chairperson and Premier, good afternoon or good morning. Thank you for your presentation. When it comes to overall federal spending, well, oftentimes there's encroachment, tramping on provincial areas of jurisdiction.
Translation setting on my end. My apologies.
Sorry, Mr. Sabar Trombley. We'll pause the time and check for interpretation.
Testing one. Testing 1 2 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1 2 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1 2 3. This is the English channel.
There's a little like globe icon.
Yeah, there might be a little globe button at the bottom for interpretation, bottom of your screen for Zoom.
Original audio English. Listen in English.
Perfect.
Let me just see if that works. Sorry, I'm new to the simultaneous translation. I hope that works.
Testing 1 2 3.
Set your time and start again, Mr. Trombley, or Savar Trombley, please.
You know, we debated as to whether or not we should play the whole clip because it's just so painful, but we decided to play the whole clip because it's just so painful. This is a platform that's used for these committee meetings, and it's pretty stunning that nobody in the premier's office, you can say the premier's busy, she doesn't have time to read the manual. That's fair. But when you are putting yourself in the position of saying, I'm going to advocate for the province of Alberta and the whole country to say the carbon tax is bad, having somebody go over how to make the things work would probably be a good place to start. But that MP did have a question that he wanted to ask, and this is where things started to get even more interesting.
An Alberta Sovereignty Act. And as a member of the Bloc Québécois, I'm quite sympathetic to that notion. I'm fighting for the complete independence of my nation, and I want to know what motivated you. What was the root cause of this? Is it because the Constitution was being flouted? Was the spending encroaching on your areas of jurisdiction? What kind of interference prompted you to do this?
Mostly it's been the various legal actions we've had to take against the federal government. We've had a victory on the Impact Assessment Act, which you know is Bill C-69. We had a success initially on the declaration of plastics being toxic, also deemed to be unconstitutional. But I can tell you my Justice Department is very busy. We have about 14 different actions that we are going to be taking against the federal government for various ways in which they're interfering with our jurisdiction.
A lot of people have been speculating for quite some time. When is Danielle Smith going to roll out the Sovereignty Act, the great impotent cannon that it is, and start to fire back at the federal government in absolutely no meaningful way? And it turns out she's been having the bureaucrats within the Alberta government apparently doing a review, a scan, if you will, of all of the different ways that maybe the federal government has arguably encroached on Alberta's jurisdiction or sovereignty. And there's 14 that Danielle Smith thinks that she's found. And so in response to the question on the Sovereignty Act, apparently Albertans and Canadians can expect 14 different resolutions or uses of the Sovereignty Act where Danielle Smith is going to stamp her feet in the legislature and say, you federal government people, we have no standing to challenge you in court. Therefore, we're just going to do something performative with the Sovereignty Act. But that it wasn't just the Sovereignty Act that Smith got challenged on. The issues ran the whole gamut.
We also were looking at providing a Ontario pension plan to supplement the Canada pension plan, to add to it. And the whole intent was to enhance CPP to make it even stronger. It's also a matter of unity. It's a matter of protecting all Canadians. You spoke at the start of talking about Albertans and Canadians for the nation's benefit. Can you explain what benefit there is to Albertans by withdrawing from CPP, creating more costs, and putting at risk their retirement?
Well, there is a formula in the Act that was insisted upon by Ontario, so that if Ontario ever wanted to get out of the Canada pension plan, there would be clear rules for how to do that. We applied that methodology and found that every year Albertans pay more in premiums than they get back in benefits. With that invested over time, it has grown to about $334 billion that we would be entitled to based on the formula in the Act. I think it's important for all Albertans to know, and also all Canadians to know, just how unbalanced Confederation is, just how much Alberta does pay into Confederation.
When Ontario was a so-called have-not province, it still provided $11 billion more to the rest of the Federation than it received, whereas other provinces, and that has happened with Alberta, but it's a national unity issue. It's about protecting Canadians. It's also about protecting Albertans for their future retirement. Before I let you go, can you document the times that you were called upon to come to this committee so that we can have that report back as well?
Certainly. It was just the one time, and we said yes immediately.
So there's some pension plan conversations. And the MP from Ontario brought up the very valid point that at different points in history, Ontario has contributed more through income tax payments, which is how people pay into equalization, than they got back. Turns out, when you're making boatloads of money, you pay more taxes, and you don't need those equalization payments. So it almost seemed like there was a couple people that maybe showed up to maybe take the premier out for a walk. And that resulted in a couple of exchanges, particularly this one here. It's a little bit longer, but it's well worth a listen, where Danny definitely was taken out for a walk.
I wanted to set the record straight right off the bat. The oil to heat pump affordability program is not just available to communities in the Atlantic provinces. That is a program that is available across Canada from coast to coast to coast across all communities. And as you rightfully pointed out, Premier, home heating oil is often the most expensive, but also the most polluting type of oil. And so again, our federal government has extended that program to all communities across Canada, including in Alberta and including in my home province of Ontario. Premier, I also wanted to highlight the fact that, again, I appreciate how the chair has unilaterally called these meetings and invited yourself and others to testify here because it is such an important meeting. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that it is interesting to me that out of the permanent Conservative members of this OGO committee, none have showed up other than the chair to ask questions of the Premier of Alberta, Premier of Saskatchewan, even though 3 of those permanent members are from Alberta and Saskatchewan. I wanted to highlight the irony of that as well, too, and it is unfortunate. But nonetheless, those that are here are really keen on talking about affordability and about climate change, which are top priorities for this government. Premier, I am very concerned about the fact that you're here to talk about and raise your concerns about the carbon pricing, which will add 3 cents per liter on gas on April 1st. And yet at the same time on April 1st, Premier, you are raising the gas tax in your home province to 13 cents, increasing it by 4 cents. I understand you were at an Axe the Tax rally yesterday, I believe, with the leader of the opposition. Can you clarify for me whether you were protesting? Was it a rally to axe your tax on the gas tax, which is adding 4 cents to a liter? If you can just clarify that for me. If you were at a rally to axe the tax that you are increasing in your province by 4 cents.
Sure, happy to answer that. I should let you know that there are 12,000 Albertans that have home heating oil of our nearly 5 million population. So I think just by those numbers, you can see that your program does not apply equally across the country. I would say as well that as I mentioned, we have had $7 billion worth of foregone revenues because we've been trying to compensate for the inflation crisis at the federal level. In fact, we
Premier, sorry, I don't mean to obtrude. My time is limited here, but are you speaking out against your government's 4-cent increase on the gas tax on April 1st? I'm just curious. And will the government listen to your concerns?
Well, the federal government charges 35 cents in gasoline taxes. We charge 13 cents. Our 13 cents goes to build roads. If your environment minister would let you build roads, maybe some of yours would go to build roads as well.
We do. Thousands of them every year. We do.
Well, he certainly doesn't seem to want to anymore.
Yes.
And the 17 cents, as we know, will not go to build roads.
Premier, I appreciate you not wanting to answer my question on that very sensitive issue of you raising the gas tax by 4 cents in your province, especially in a period right now of really where there's an affordability crisis.
I mean, you have to. The delivery is very, very clearly performative, but you have to admire the fact that Danny isn't used to being challenged in that kind of a way, and she got really, really angry for a little bit there, and couldn't back up what she was saying with actual facts. Again, being able to back up what one says with actual facts is going to be a bit of a theme of this episode. But that was the only exchange that she had with that MP.
Worried about the fact, Premier, that last year you had 2.2 million hectares of land burned in Alberta, and you had 299 days of smoke days in the city of Edmonton. Both records, absolute records. Can you tell us whether climate change caused these wildfires and these smoke days? Yes or no?
I would say that 60% of the fires are caused by human activity, and so we're doing a public campaign to make sure that people are safer.
Well, I thought you would say that, Premier, because I looked at a report from your own Forestry and Parks, which stated that there were 1,121 wildfires last year. Of those, 91 were caused by arson, which is and that includes 262 acres out of the 2.2 million acres that were burned. It's only 0.1% of land that was burned was caused by human activity. Can you speak about the vast majority that was caused by, again, by drought conditions and the heat conditions in your province? And furthermore, the most important question, Madam Premier, what are you doing to fight climate change and the forest fires and the drought in your community that is devastating land in your community and communities?
Well,
I apologize,
60%.
but Premier Smith, I apologize, but Mr. Kuzmierczuk has used up his time. You can respond in writing, because I understand we do have to get you out at a certain time. I apologize.
I mean, there's two things that are going on there. First of all, Danielle Smith saved by the bell, but second of all, that was a very, very masterful execution of watching the clock by Mr. Kuzmierczuk there, because he phrased the question and ran out the clock long enough that Danielle Smith wouldn't be able to answer. Now, I do have to point out, there's a little bit of nuance that I would have loved to see play out a little bit more in that particular exchange, because there's some wordplay that's happening. I mean, the MP is correct that only 91 fires that only accounted for 262 hectares were created by arson. The remaining 2.2 million were, and this is where the wordplay comes in, created by two different things. Yes, Danielle Smith is absolutely correct. 60% are caused by human activity. But there's variables that we have to add up here, because human activity includes things like taking the ATV out for a rip. And if you're dealing with normal conditions, the odds of that starting a fire are considerably less. It's human activity. And under normal conditions, things are damp enough, you're not going to get a fire. But because of the dryness of the conditions, it takes much less human activity to cause those fires. So it's a little bit of both. And it would have been very interesting to see that conversation play out in good faith. Although it's pretty clear from these exchanges, there wasn't a whole lot of good faith going on most of the sides. But she got asked some other questions too that we want to make sure that we hit off before we move to our final segment.
Earlier this year, you imposed a moratorium on all renewable energy projects in your province. Your decision impacted over $33 billion in energy investment and over 24,000 jobs. 6 months later, you then released a plan that would permanently ban or limit the construction of renewable energy in over 75% of Alberta, citing a concern that renewable energy projects have an impact on, and I quote, viewscapes. My question is, do oil rigs impact viewscapes? Yes or no?
The wind turbines are the size of the Calgary Tower or the CN
asking about
Tower,
oil rigs. I'm asking about oil rigs, Premier. Yes or no? Do they impact viewscapes?
No, they're not the same size as the Calgary Tower.
Do coal mines impact viewscapes? Yes or no?
We only have 4 advanced coal projects in Alberta. The coal mining is actually more of a British Columbia issue.
Does the Grassy Lake coal mine, a project on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, impact viewscapes? Yes or no? I've got very limited time, Premier.
That was a project from the 1950s, and it's currently not in operation.
But does it impact viewscapes?
It's currently going through a regulatory process.
So do you think that oil and coal mines have a lesser impact on viewscapes than solar panels would?
I would say, as I said, it's the wind turbines we're concerned about because of the size of the Calgary Tower. And in some of these projects, there's 100 or 200 of them on a single site. And they also find themselves in migratory pathways, so they have an impact on bird and bat populations.
So your restrictions will not impact solar panel projects, renewable projects in the province of Alberta?
They will. The issue around solar is making sure that it doesn't take up arable land, prime agriculture land. We're spending a lot of money with the federal government on irrigation, and there's certain uses that are incompatible. You can't put pivots on a landscape that has acres and acres of solar panels. So we're asking for them to be moved to marginal landscapes.
So I'm having a hard time if you're not going to allow renewable sources of energy to take place and create thousands of jobs and investment in Alberta. How are you proposing to reduce emissions that you're claiming that Alberta is doing when the evidence is to the contrary?
Well, the reason why we have so much solar and wind in our province is because we have a free market. You'll notice that there are many other jurisdictions that don't, so they don't have wind and solar. But the reason wind and solar make sense in our province is because there's natural gas backup. You can talk to any solar or wind provider, and they know that we need natural gas. Natural gas has a carbon tax on it. And so if you want to see more wind and solar, you should take the taxes off of the peaker plants that are going to back them up.
Again, it almost has a little bit of a knife to a gunfight feel. Because Danielle Smith was challenged. Does oil and gas infrastructure impact viewscapes? And she couldn't answer the question. She refused to answer the question because the answer to the question is unquestionably, yes, they do. There's no getting around that. But where she spoke about the Grassy Mountain mine, about it's an old project. It's going through a process. When you juxtapose that with the decisions that have been made by Brian Jean to push the project forward as an advanced project, when you juxtapose that with Smith's argument on her radio show that the only way to remediate that area is to go ahead and mine the whole thing, it's a little bit incongruent, let's say, with the argument that she's making in front of the committee. But the real point, the real point of the committee, that particular committee meeting, was laid pretty bare on multiple occasions. We're going to play just one of them.
Please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and Premier, appreciate you being here, and I apologize for those earlier points of order. As you can appreciate, a Conservative chair brought you here without consultation of this committee to talk about main estimates, but now we're talking about something else completely different, which is meant for the Finance Committee. And yesterday we put forward a motion, the last motion, which the Conservative chair did not allow us to pass. He adjourned, which made it very clear what the will of the committee was, notwithstanding the misinterpretation of an earlier motion. So I just wanted to preface that by saying to you that we appreciate you being here, but we also recognize the politics involved and the partisanship that's taking place. And can you advise us, when were you contacted to appear before this committee?
Sure, I was contacted. We wrote a letter on March the 26th asking to appear before the Finance Committee.
No, the OGO committee. When were you approached to approach
correct.
OGO?
After we'd written our letter, we were approached on the same day, March the 26th, to appear before the committee.
Thank you for that.
And there it is. The bottom line is that committee was reconvened for no reason other than to try to generate some performative sound bites for the two premiers who showed up to that particular sitting of the meeting of that committee. That's all that it was. It was the opportunity for a Conservative MP who was the chair of the committee, who went against the vote of that committee to adjourn so that he could have Danielle Smith on so that she could do her little dog and pony show about how bad the carbon tax is. And if that isn't bad enough, if that isn't offensive enough that taxpayers' dollars and time were kept going in order to keep this committee going, because yes, MPs get paid the same no matter what, but when you consider all of the supports, I mean, apparently Smith's IT team had the day off, but when you consider all of the supports that exist to make a committee meeting like that happen, it's not free. And so this was an entirely performative exercise so that a couple of Conservative premiers could say, look, we're standing up to Ottawa. I'm testifying to a parliamentary committee. Look at what a big deal I am. Never mind the fact it's the wrong parliamentary committee. And the whole of the committee, the majority of the committee, didn't even want you there in the first place because they recognized it's not their sandbox. Danielle Smith went to testify to a committee that has no control or influence over the issue that she went to testify to them about because it's the only one that would hear her on such short notice, and they only heard her because the MP who is the chair of that committee is from Alberta. Moving on from there. And we're going to get into the main event here. It's going to get a little spicy, not going to lie. We got a couple things that we got to address because it's been a bit of a topic on the socials for the breakdown. And this is going to be done in kind of two parts because that's probably the best way to do it. Because there really are two parts to this conversation. There's the initial part of the conversation that we presented, and then there's the part that we found ourselves dragged into later on in the week. We're going to address both of those, but we're going to do them in different sections. So what we're talking about next is the official UCP event that was held on March 19th, 2024, at Canyon Meadows Cinema. Now, I want to be really, really clear because this is why it's significant. This is why this is important. This is why we're talking about it on our show. This is not a gathering of the South Calgary Tinfoil Hat Club. This is not some sort of fringe group. This is an official United Conservative Party of Alberta event that took place in Calgary and was attended by the president of the Constituency Association for Calgary Lougheed. It was organized by the Constituency Association for Calgary Lougheed, but it was also attended by the president of the whole party. So, to break it down, just to make sure that we get the context right on this, you got the Constituency Association for Calgary Lougheed, and they're the ones that do all the stuff specific to Calgary Lougheed, ironically enough, Jason Kenney's old constituency. It's a bit of a conservative stronghold. So you've got the Calgary Lougheed Constituency Association. They're going to put on this little event that's literally called What Matters to You? Let Kids Be Kids. That's what's going on here. It was attended by a number of people. We're going to talk about some of them. But in particular, of note, the president of the entire party. So this is the president of the UCP for all of Alberta. He chose to attend this event and speak at it. And where this gets to be important is because there are certain positions or certain roles that lend the appearance of legitimacy to certain events. That's a really important thing to be aware of. The president of the UCP doesn't go to every single little UCP event across the province. He just doesn't. But when the president of the UCP, the highest elected person within the party of the UCP, we're not talking about the MLAs and the premier and all of that. We're talking about the internal infrastructure. You know, that infrastructure that Take Back Alberta was so proud of taking over? When we're talking about those people, he is the highest ranking person in the party. And he chose not just to attend this event, but to speak at it, as did some other folks. Now, it's worth remembering when we're talking about Calgary Lougheed, we're talking about Calgary Lougheed. Calgary Lougheed is also the constituency association that saw the MLA for Calgary Lougheed, by some reports. He has presented the failure of his business as being a direct result of COVID, even though his business was well into failure before COVID. He made a risky business move in regards to moving his restaurant and lost the farm on it. And then he blamed it on COVID because I guess that's what all the cool kids were doing. I'm not sure. But there's been some other fundraisers. There's been some other events. And we're talking about high-profile fundraisers, high-profile events that anybody who's paying attention to Alberta politics, and even a lot of people who weren't, were probably aware of. Because back in the run-up to the last provincial election, we saw the let's go ahead and call it a convoy fundraiser. It was held on April 26, 2023. And it got some people in some hot water, including the Premier of Alberta, because she posed for some pictures with some folks. And there were a lot of controversial people that she posed for pictures with, but one of them was facing criminal charges. And that person was none other than James Bowder. James Bowder being one of the main convoy organizers, who's now facing charges of mischief to obstruct property, disobeying a lawful court order, obstructing a peace officer. He's got himself some legal problems. He's tried to move his case a couple of times, hasn't worked out for him. It's also worth noting James Bowder was one of the original authors of the Memo of Understanding that the convoy used and kept using up until they abandoned it when they realized they weren't getting public support, that literally called for the overthrow of the federal government to be replaced with a bunch of the convoy folks. So to call Mr. Bowder, I don't know, an insurrectionist, a seditionist, you're not really stepping out of line. This is who Danielle Smith posed with at a former Calgary Lougheed event, just to set the stage a little bit. Now, there's a couple other things that we want to address really quickly, because there's been some things that have been said on social media. And if we're going to go after something, we're going to go after it with as much accuracy as possible. Unfortunately, some media outlets don't share that passion, I guess, for accuracy. And so, unsurprisingly, reportedly the only media group that was allowed into this event was The Rebel. And The Rebel attended, and you can watch the 3-minute thing that The Rebel did if you hate yourself, I guess. I don't know. But the Rebel did a thing where they actually had a conversation with the Constituency Association president. And one of the things that the Constituency Association president complained about was the fact that there were a lot of people who didn't like the idea that this thing was going to be a thing. In fact, according to the Constituency Association president, there were over 600 emails and calls that were logged with Canyon Meadows Cinema saying, hey, this isn't cool. Please don't do this. This isn't cool for a whole list of reasons. Please don't do this. And in that Rebel report, he said that he was going to put the names of every single person who said anything bad. Now, it's important to bear in mind one of the things that a lot of the folks who were involved with this event like to complain about is cancel culture. Now, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not an academic. I couldn't speak with certainty, so I'm not going to try to where the line is between accountability and cancel culture. Lord knows we've been canceled a few times on the show, and yet here we are. We are, however, open on the show to being held accountable when we get something wrong. And we are entirely comfortable being held accountable to the things that we say and the content that we produce. We have in the past issued apologies, and we have in the past issued retractions when we have done a big thing badly. So, we've also stood our ground on more than a few occasions, which is why we've been canceled, and yet here we are. So the veracity of cancel culture, I'm not sure how effective it is, but there's a lot of people who are involved with this. In fact, it was one of the themes of the evening was, cancel culture. It's so bad. You know, when somebody does something and then they're held accountable to it. So it's a little dissonant that the CA president would then respond and say on Rebel News, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put all their names up. We're going to make them famous. Because A, that seems kind of cancel culture-y, and B, they only put up 2. Now we've deleted the names of the people who were named, but they put up these 2 quotes, and they called it organized hate, which is a little hyperbolic, because I mean, have you all seen the comments section on Facebook or Twitter? These are no worse than any of those. And there is some definite righteous indignation. One of the comments was, why do you feel the need to make public events to celebrate your hate and ignorance? This is just gross. You suck. Now, I'm with them all the way up until the you suck. That part is, I don't know if it's really necessary. But everything else, I don't have a problem saying I totally agree with. This event... The other comment, this event is an anti-queer, transphobic gathering that actually aims to harm and stifle children rather than supporting them or keeping them safe. I'm disappointed to see it at all, particularly being put forward as a fun, pro-children night out. Disgusting, small-minded, and hateful. There is no place for this in our city. Now, I don't know how anybody can read that comment and go, oh, that's so hateful, because it doesn't, by any means or interpretation, come anywhere near the threshold for hate speech. But nonetheless, the president of the Constituency Association for the UCP, with no objection from the audience or anyone else in attendance, decided that he would put these 2 comments up and say that they were examples of organized hate. Do with that what you will. Which brings us to the clips. Now, I should probably throw a little bit of a trigger warning, I guess, in front of this, because we are putting this show out on Trans Day of Visibility. And one would hope that Trans Day of Visibility would largely be a celebratory day for members of the trans community. But one of the things that we've come to believe on the breakdown is part of trying to live up to the notion of allyship is doing the work of calling things out so that the people who are constantly being targeted don't have to do it all the time on their own. I want to be clear. We've run this next segment by members of the trans community just to make sure that what we're about to do here isn't terribly offside, and we've been told we're well within parameters. So if you want to cancel us, that's cool, but we're going to keep doing the show, and we don't have any sponsors. So, I mean, do your best, I guess. Because there were some clips that came out of the evening that were extremely problematic. The first one, and again, I want to be really, really clear. When we're taking a look at the list of speakers for this event, you do not see any elected officials outside of the president for the Constituency Association and the president of the entire party. No MLA spoke. No ministers spoke. The premier did not speak. But despite all of that, they had quite the security supports.
Something does happen. I will say for the personal safety of people here today that the Legislative Assembly Security Detail is here this evening. They will remove people from the building who cannot be tolerant to the evening as it is going along.
Now you have to wonder about that, because there is supposed to be a big separation between the resources of the taxpayer and the resources of the party. And to be clear, if the UCP wants to put on the tinfoil hat bigoted conspiracy theory night, they're within their rights to do that. Because unless you're actively inciting harm on a specific group, you're not committing hate speech. So if they want to say abstract things, and not all of the things, to be clear, that they said that night were abstract, if they want to say abstract things, they're allowed under the charter to do that. But they're not supposed to, by any record that we can find, be given access to the legislative security detail to provide security for their private event, particularly when, again, there are no MLAs speaking, there are no ministers speaking, the premier isn't speaking. There's some big questions to be asked around that, and you better believe we're going to be filing a FOIP on that one. But that wasn't the only question of impropriety, of allocation of resources, perhaps, that was raised that evening.
In case you hadn't signed the recall conduct petition, we will have a number of people outside in the lobby awaiting your signatures. If you need a list of reasons, just ask my wife. She has it down to a science now. In fact, she starts with, so which one of these 13 appeals to you?
So there we have. Again, let me sum it up. At an official UCP event attended by the Constituency Association president, and again, the president of the entire party, they are not just allowing the presence of people who are engaging in the Recall Gondek municipal initiative. The municipal initiative to remove the mayor of Calgary. You can love her or hate her, makes no difference to me. But you have an official provincial government party event that is openly allowing space for and promoting this petition. Now, again, if it was not an official party event, then you probably wouldn't have an issue with that. But when you have party resources being utilized to prop up this municipal recall petition, that is, to anybody who doesn't suffer from serious cognitive dissonance, a tremendous conflict of interest. Now, whether or not there's overlap between the two groups, it is basic ethics that if you wear multiple hats, you're very, very clear about what hat you're wearing when you're speaking about a thing. This is something that I personally practice on the show all the time, because if we're speaking about healthcare issues or if we're speaking about EMS issues, I make it known, I do the disclosure as is appropriate that, hey, you know what? I actually work in healthcare. I have a bias here. I want to put that up front so everybody knows it so they can judge my comments on the basis of that. But when you don't disclose that, and when you actively utilize your different organizations as force multipliers for your various issues, that is a failure of ethics. It is a failure of moral conduct. And this was a failure that occurred again with the president of the UCP sitting on the exact same stage at the exact same time that comment was made. But of course, there's more. Because one of the things that came up had to do with one of the speakers.
Presenters, we have many of them. We'll talk to Blaine Badiak, Tori Tanner, Kim McBride, and John Hilton O'Brien. And I will say one thing, we get the most hate mail for Tori Tanner. And ironically, Tori Tanner, of course, young lady ran in Lethbridge West. She stepped down when she had made what apparently at the time was a controversial video. Turns out it was the truth. Little problem with that.
Okay, now, we're fairly familiar with that Tori Tanner video because we're the ones what blew it up. Tori Tanner's video was a video that she put forward when she was running for the UCP nomination in one of the Lethbridge constituencies. And what she said in that video, well, you know what? Rather than be accused of taking things out of context or cherry picking, we're just going to play the video.
Are in a unique position to protect the innocence of our children. Yet alarmingly, we are seeing increasing instances where kids, even those attending kindergarten, are being exposed to pornographic materials, or worse yet, having teachers help them change their gender identity with absolutely no parental consent or knowledge whatsoever. This needs to be stopped immediately. We need to get involved on school boards, on parent councils, so that we can keep those precious little ones safe from this kind of outrageously inappropriate behavior. As an educator and mother myself, this concerns me greatly, because when it comes down to protecting youth, silence just isn't an option anymore. So I'm asking that you stand with me to take action on protecting our children.
Now, I try not to use very much language on the show that is of profane nature, but I want to be really, really clear. Everything that you just heard was unmitigated bullshit. There is no truth to any of it. It is fear-mongering of the worst order. Period. End of sentence. To make the accusation that kindergarten teachers are showing kindergarten students pornography is not only ignoring the fact that that would be criminal, but it's also ignoring the fact there's no instances of it. It's fiction. And it's fiction generated to try to turn people against members of not just the LGBTQ2S plus community, but particularly the trans community. And that shines through particularly brightly when she leans into the notion that teachers are trying to convince kids to change their gender without the parents knowing. Now, this is where I'm going to refer you back to the conversation that we had with a physician who actually provides gender-affirming care. Because rather than go to pinheads who are trying to get elected and are willing to throw out bullshit rhetoric in order to try to make people fear vote for them, one of the things that we try to do at the show is talk to the people who actually have the expertise. And if you go back and you listen to that conversation, you'll see that physician is very, very clear. Not a thing. That doesn't happen. The only way that a physician would ever initiate any kind of treatment for a kid or an underage person would be is if that person demonstrated themselves to have full competence, which is something that physicians are trained to determine. And that in and of itself is incredibly rare. That physician that we spoke to was very, very clear. They try to make sure the family's involved. They try to make sure the parents are involved, and they don't do anything, especially for younger kids, without parental involvement and consent. Now, where this would only get more rich would be is if that physician was from the same city that Tori Tanner's from, and there would be somehow some really easy way for Tori Tanner to get these answers instead of spouting unmitigated bullshit. Oh, wait, they are both from Lethbridge. Pretty easy to source out. If you're actually interested in getting accurate information, if you're actually interested in getting accurate facts. She presents herself as being an educator. And I suppose technically, if you call someone who utilizes homeschooling an educator, you might be able to get away with that. But that's kind of where the line's drawn. Now, when we found that video, Of course we did everything in our power to make sure that people were aware of it, because she's lying. She's saying things that are demonstrably false, that put both kids and teachers at risk, because there are people who believe bullshit when spoken convincingly. That's one of the dangers of that kind of rhetoric. She had to step down from her candidacy. None of us at the show feel bad about that. The point of all of this, however, is to illustrate the fact that there is an established public record for these speakers. There is an established public record for this organization. You don't have to look hard for it. All you have to do is Google Calgary Lougheed or Tory Tanner, and you can see very, very quickly who's involved with this. And this is where we're going to get ourselves into it, because there was another speaker that night. In fact, it was the first official speaker of the 75-minute program. There were 5 speakers for that 75-minute program. The speaker only got 7 minutes. It's pretty short. And we didn't actually say anything about the speaker while we were highlighting these clips, but this person decided that they wanted to make an issue of things. And so they've said some things. We're going to offer our rebuttal. I'm speaking of trans woman Blaine Badiak. This was the first speaker of the event. And I think that the introduction that was offered for Blaine in and of itself is pretty telling.
He's a student at the University of Lethbridge. I know, brand new microphones. Blaine, I will introduce you. You can then maybe introduce me. But here's what I know. Blaine says she's transgender. I just want you to know that up front in case you didn't.
Blaine says she's transgender. It's a very deliberate choice of wording. It's a very deliberate turn of phrase. There's some implications in that language that are important to unpack, because the conversation, and we're going to play a longer clip in just a second, the conversation that Blaine was a part of was to get the perspective of Blaine, presumably as a trans person, as they talk about all of the horrible things that trans people are doing and the doctors and the teachers are doing to the kids. And my God, let's get the perspective of a trans person. But let's be clear, they weren't looking for the perspectives of a trans person. They were looking for the perspective of somebody who says they're trans. That choice of words in and of itself immediately invalidates the reality that is simply being trans for everybody who is trans. If he was introducing an athlete, which, well, that's a bad example because being an athlete's a choice. But if he was introducing an athlete, he wouldn't say, this is George. He won a gold medal in running. He says he's a runner. If he was introducing a surgeon, he wouldn't say, he says he's a surgeon. That language shows right out of the gates that there is a level of disbelief that exists in regards to, but are they really? Now that should have been, one could argue, the first warning sign if Blaine had looked, and I don't know whether or not Blaine had looked into who was organizing the event, what the history of the event organizers were. I don't know if Blaine had looked into the history of the other speakers and the incredible hateful things that they've said towards teachers and physicians and the trans community. I don't know that. But that comment in and of itself should have been a hint that there was a little bit of subtext going on to the conversation. Now, we're going to play a clip, and then we're going to talk about that clip, and we're going to talk about the language that's used in the clip by both the person asking the questions, who, for the record, is the Constituency Association president for the UCP in Calgary, Lougheed. But we're also going to talk about some of the major problems that exist with how Blaine answers the questions.
Says to you, well, there's exceptions, and really kids who are 8 should be able to make their own decisions, or they're 12, or they're getting to be 14. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that those kids should be able to go to a third party and not involve the parent in the conversation, and then to have that third party validate those kids in a way that pulls them from their parents?
Absolutely not. Just absolutely not. We know that the number one indicator of successful children is an involved parent, ideally involved parents, and a supportive family around them. So there's any idea that any child should be able to make these massive decisions alone is ignoring that foundational principle. And I can understand where some people are worried that they may not have support at home. But why start on that premise when we have existing legislation to deal with in those rare cases? And I'm saying really rare. Because we're seeing an issue where a lot of teenagers are identifying as trans, and they may not actually be. And that worries me specifically. And having a parent will help that.
And do you think that that comes from pressure? Do you think that's a peer pressure? Or do you think that there is programming that's occurring in schools that give kids a premature idea of questioning their sexuality?
I think a little bit of both, maybe.
Sorry, a tough question, right? But
I think that almost every teacher I know, when I was going to school to become a teacher, they're excellent educators and they follow the best practice they can, and we know. But there is a social pressure, definitely on the TikToks. That is the number one area where I'm seeing, especially young teens, fall into the algorithms, and they just read all this stuff, and then they get deep under and told that this is who they are. And no, that's not what it is.
Now, there's a lot to unpack there. And before I get into really dissecting that section, one of the things that I want to emphasize is there's a blog post that was written by somebody who is a counselor. They are a psychologist. They do work with trans youth. They have already offered up their own response. I'm going to read some of those responses because those are coming from a clinical expert standpoint. But I also very much want to talk about the language that's used and how toxic and dangerous some of that language actually is. So in regards to the first question, I'm going to read the little. We're going to put the blog post in the show notes so everybody can read it because you really, really should. But we're going to talk about the first question, if you will, that this gets asked. I'm going to read the blog post, and I'm going to share some of the things that we've taken out of it as a team here. The blog post is, "This is a loaded question and it's hugely misleading. First, lying at its core, it contains the subtle claim that minors are unable to know themselves and assert for their legitimate needs. Second, it disregards the reality that no treatment can happen at those ages without parental consent, period." Now, that is accurate because that is exactly what we heard from the physician who provides gender-affirming care in Lethbridge. That is an accurate statement. It doesn't happen that way. Third, it presupposes that if the child confides in another adult, that this is somehow driving a wedge between the child and their parents. Again, this is false. Now, that's the blog response. We got some thoughts as well. The question starts out by listing some ages. It says those ages are, should a child at 8 be able to make these massive decisions, or 12, or 14? That is a very deliberate choice of words and tool to imply that this is a problem, that kids who are 8 are accessing treatment without parental support or knowledge. That's a really dangerous sort of thing to say. because it creates the perception that this is a problem all the way down to those really young ages. And as noted, it's simply not true. Treatment doesn't get started for those age ranges. Now, the next part of the question had to do with the not involving parents, and does it pull parents away from their kids? I have said it on this show many times before, and I will say it as many times as I need to. The relationship that exists between a parent and a child is the responsibility of those parents. And if you have done such a bad job of making your child feel safe, that they don't feel like they can come to you with these things, it is not your place to blame any other adult that they decide to turn to for guidance and support. You should be grateful that those people exist in their lives. Period. If you haven't built that relationship with your kid, it's on you. And if you care about your kid, one would think that you would want them to have these conversations, these critical conversations about self and identity with somebody that they feel like they can trust. Because again, nothing's going to happen. Nothing can legally happen for any of the ages that are listed in that question. The notion that any kid would have to make that massive decision alone is disingenuous, because the question is, should they talk to other people who give them supports? Well, if they're talking to other people who are giving them supports, I guess they're not making that massive decision alone. And as much as the idea is nice that the vast majority of kids, particularly trans kids, have parents who they feel are supportive, the evidence is that it's not a massive majority. It's 2 out of 3, roughly, which means 1 out of 3 kids doesn't feel like they have that support. And again, we see the echoing of Danielle Smith's argument. We have laws in place for things like that. If a kid's being abused, going after the parents after the abuse has happened doesn't erase that trauma. And if a kid's being abused, the likelihood of that abuse being worse after they've broached these things from a statistical standpoint, the evidence is clear. The likelihood of them being abused worse goes way up. The likelihood of them being houseless or homeless goes way up. The likelihood of them being trafficked goes way up. To just present it as, no, there's laws, it'll be fine. Why should we assume the worst? Because if you don't, you allow the worst to happen and then you deal with the mess after. Now, this is not to say that all parents should be painted with the same brush of all parents are bad, but to have safeguards in place and safety nets in place is putting the safety of those kids ahead of everything else. And if parents are truly, as Blaine claims, overwhelmingly invested in the safety and the health of their kids, they won't have a problem with that, because they've got the best interests of their kids that they're looking out for. The subtle subtext of all of this is that there's something wrong with those kids. And it's a subtext that Blaine actually reinforces, because makes the argument that, there's all these kids that are saying they're trans, but maybe they're not. And that's concerning. One would think that would be up to the child, the parents, their support systems, their support networks, the medical people, the counselors, everybody who's involved in that child's life to determine, not a pundit at an event put on by bigots held at a movie theater? The second question, I'm going to read the blog response. Again, this is based on false premises, and those are enormously problematic. First, it supposes that teens identifying as trans is somehow a result of peer pressure, and then it cues up one of the later presentations by implying that comprehensive sex education is being used to prime children to question their gender and sexuality, thereby making them queer. Now, it's been said many times, and I can't speak from personal experience here, but I'm speaking based on many conversations that I've had with people who not only have lived experience, but actual clinical expertise in these issues. Being trans isn't easy. It isn't cool. It doesn't make you the coolest kid in school. It doesn't make you the coolest kid on the internet. Being trans is actually, I'm told, incredibly hard. That's one of the reasons why these conversations are so important, and why it is that people who are engaging in these conversations are having these conversations based on evidence, based on facts. Because when you deviate from that and you just start saying, they're just all these kids on the TikTok, they're trying to be cool, is a gross oversimplification of all of the science and all of the evidence that exists on gender and identity. Peer pressure can be used to convince kids to do lots of stupid things. When I was a kid, I used to hang off the back bumper of a car on icy roads and skate. It was stupid, and I did it because I wanted to be cool. But that did not change my identity. I mean, it could have ended my life. Thankfully, it didn't. But I wasn't pretending to be something that I wasn't. And again, the notion that you can somehow convince people to change their gender, to change their identity, to change who they're attracted to, implies that being trans is simply a choice. And it implies that if you just get them at the right time, you can stop them from making that bad choice. It's incredibly flawed. It doesn't align with the evidence. I'm curious, and I would welcome the correction. What sort of statistics and social media expertise Blaine brings to the conversation? Because to say I'm seeing all of this stuff happening on TikTok is a statement that I presume one wouldn't make without significant quantifiable evidence. And this brings us to the crux of the problem, which is unfortunately incredibly timely for the date of this recording, because as I said earlier, we're recording this on March 31st, which is Easter Sunday and Trans Day of Visibility. The language that has been used to defend the statements that have been made by Tory Tanner, by the president of the UCP, by the president of the Constituency Association for Calgary Law Heat for the UCP, and by Blaine have been, I'm just sharing my personal belief. I believe people should be able to have personal beliefs. I don't have a problem with people having personal beliefs. But the thing about personal beliefs is the first word. They're personal. If you want to believe on today, March 31st, that today somehow marks the day that Jesus Christ rose from the grave, this is the day that he resurrected. If you want to believe that, fill your boots. I don't care. If that gives you comfort, I'm happy for you. If you want to believe that today is the day that the flying spaghetti monster descended from the sky and did spaghetti monster things, I don't know very much about that particular faith, the Pastafarians. If that's what you want to believe, fill your boots. Again, I don't care. It's your personal belief. You can believe those things on a personal level. because they only affect you. But as soon as you cross the line into saying that your personal beliefs that are not based on evidence, they're not based on facts, they're not based on reality, as soon as you cross the line to saying that those personal beliefs on those foundations are things that should now impact others' lives, you have crossed the line. That's the bottom line. We saw this today, all day today. We saw the faux outrage from the right in regards to a tweet that was put out by Veterans Affairs where they said, we wish everybody a happy March holiday season. And when you actually take a look at the religious calendar, Ramadan's still going on. There's lots of things that happen in the month of March. And to make an inclusive statement like that is not exclusive of anyone. But the number of people who lit their hair on fire saying, but it's Easter. Why can't you say it's Easter? It's woke cancel culture. No, it's not. Just because somebody doesn't acknowledge your personal belief as their own doesn't invalidate your personal belief. And if you feel like it does, that speaks to the strength of your personal belief. And this is part of the fundamental problem that we have with the conversation of politics in this province and in this country right now. Everybody seems to think that their feelings should be the things that define how other people have to live their lives. If we're talking about medicine, if we're talking about empirical areas of science, I don't care what your feelings are when it comes to you imposing those feelings on other people. If you want to make your own medical choices, again, fill your boots. I don't care. But when you start to say, because I have these feelings that, by the way, may in fact be contradicted by evidence and facts and reality, you now have to change how you're living your life. Because I know how to speak in the language of fear, you now have to change your life. And this is what has been dominating the conversation around trans rights in the province of Alberta. It's embarrassing. It should be beneath us. But unfortunately, it seems to be very, very clear that for a good number of people, the sense of self-importance and the validation of their personal beliefs outweighs the consequences for everybody else around them. And that is a tragedy. And the only question that I would ask Blaine, would be simply, you were introduced as somebody who says they're trans. You spoke in your presentation about how you aspired at one point to be a teacher. And the ugly question that needs to be asked for anybody who stands up in that room needs to be, how many of those people in that room, the president of the Constituency Association for Calgary-Lougheed, how many of them do you think would let you teach their kids? Because that's the problem with personal beliefs. That's the end of our official program for the evening. Went a little bit longer than I anticipated. I got a little ranty at the end there. But, and we got a little tiny spaces tonight, I'm told. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm going to do a little bit of a vamp while I open it up to the floor. As always, if anybody is on the Twitter Spaces and they have some thoughts that they want to share, by all means, do the little microphone thingy. We'll bring you in. Otherwise, I'm going to say we got some things coming that we're pretty excited about. We're doing a very deep dive on another media group that we're excited to be presenting, and probably we're hoping for about the next 3 to 4 weeks. There's some things that we're waiting for, hopefully, to get sorted out in order to proceed with that. We have a couple of conversations that we're going to be coming up. We're going to be dropping one later this week with a amazing advocate for disabilities, and it's a challenging conversation. I'm not going to lie. We have kind of gone back and forth on how to best present it because it's a challenging conversation. But we're gonna be presenting that on Wednesday, hopefully for our Patreon supporters in the next little bit here, probably tomorrow. Fingers crossed. And then the big exciting news, our website sucks. Our Patreon page is awesome. We got some stuff up on there, but you got to be a Patreon supporter, and so there's a little bit exclusive. I mean, really, the best thing that you get out of Patreon is early access to our interview videos, and you also get a little bit of a warm, fuzzy feeling from knowing that you're helping us do what we do and piss off people in power. But we don't really have any like flashy web presence, and we get criticized constructively for putting all of our efforts into the Twitter space, the Twitter universe, the Twitterverse. So we're going to be launching in the coming weeks, maybe months, I don't know, but soon, a brand new website, and it is. I got to have the sit down with the team that's developing the website today. I'm so excited. So keep an eye out for that. We also do have, I'm going to do the plug for our merch now, just to get it out of the way. And then we do have Tammy, who's going to weigh in tonight. We do also have, as always, our partnership with abpoly.ca, where we have all of the merch available. So we've got the mugs, which are fantastic. We have the hoodies with the super dope logo. We have the t-shirts that use some of the phrases that I apparently overuse, I'm told. And then we still have our beanies as well, which, while wonderful for winter, are also cooling to some degree, so you could wear them in the fake springs that we keep having in the province of Alberta. And as always, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a cup of coffee or a fancy muffin or a really good slice of lemon meringue pie, perhaps, whatever suits your fancy, you can help us to continue to produce the kind of content that we do, which reminds me, we got some FOIP results coming back. We're going to be talking about them next weekend. Next Sunday. We got some fascinating FOIP results back. We're going to be sharing those. And we are only able to do all of those FOIPs and everything else that we do because of the support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. So if you got a little bit of extra kicking around, www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. All of that being said, we've got Tammy, who's sitting in the queue, and I'm looking forward. Tammy is one of our regulars, and I am looking forward to seeing what she's got to say tonight. So, Tammy, how are you doing?
Oh, not too bad.
Good. What's going on?
So for me, I'm Wiccan. So for me, the March holiday is Austera, and it happened on March 20th. So our family, this is Easter is called Easter Bunny Day. It's we go and we get chocolate Easter eggs and we eat Easter eggs, but it has nothing to do with the Christian Easter. We just like chocolate Easter bunnies because we've already done our Austera thing. And I could totally go and rant on about how Christianity basically stole all of the old religion holidays and made, because people would celebrate on those days. So rather than getting people to actually switch to their religion, they just made their normal holidays match the Christian holidays.
Yep.
So, yeah, but that isn't the main thing that I want to chat about. So we're talking about folks that are trans. And I have and specifically kids. But I'm going to talk to about an older friend of mine. I'm older than her, but she's definitely not a kid. So this idea that, oh, well, they have to wait and they have to go to parents, they have to do that, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It literally, Blaine, I can see you in the chat, it doesn't work. This is why. My friend, who is trans, she's actually, she identifies as both male and female.
Okay, so non-binary.
Calls herself a they. And she accepts that I am dumb and I have a real hard time switching the pronouns. So she says, it's just Tammy. Some of it is the stroke. It's hard to do, but I try. And she recognizes that I try. But her family first, they were married to a man. And that went down extremely poorly for her. There's abuse going on. There's lots of things going on. And so she divorced him. Then she thought, well, I must be gay. And she hooked up with a girl. And again, it didn't go well because she wasn't gay. She's somewhere in between. And now she's finally gotten into being who she really is, being who they really are. But their family, their mother gets it and is kind of the same as me, trying to use the right pronouns and stuff. Their dad and their brothers, this is an adult woman. They live in the States, so money isn't great there amongst all of them. So they share a house, and it's still a problem for they. Like their mom is okay with it, but their dad and their brother isn't.
And that happens. I mean, like I go back to sorry to jump in, but I go back to the conversation that we had with Marnie Panis about, I think that there's a reality that exists for a lot of trans folks, and I can't speak with this empirically, but there's a lot of people who transition later in life, and it's because they haven't been in environments where that language or that terminology is available to them, and to be able to know these are the things that are possibilities. These are the things that are out there. So they end up transitioning much later. But I also go to, Marnie's story about how when she came out to her family, to her parents, I'm working from memory here, but I'm pretty sure that was the last time that she spoke to them because they won't have anything to do with her. And that is a reality that exists. And the statistics bear that out.
And their dad and their brother is still waiting for them to just get over it. That's literally what the males in their family think are going to happen. They'll get over it. Just had a bad experience with that first husband. They'll get over it. No, they won't.
It's who they are, and that's my fundamental beef with this event and the conversations that have been going on in the province is that there's this underlying assumption that exists that says, maybe they'll just get over it. Maybe if the parents intervene at an early age, or I don't care what the scenario is, maybe somehow that will be the thing that makes them not be who and what they are, and that's just traumatizing. And to not condemn that, to me, is a complete and total failure of responsibility.
And the idea is that these are kids. One of the things my friend said is, geez, I wish I had known about all of this when I was younger. I wouldn't have had two horrible relationships that still leaves her with trauma from those relationships. Maybe she could have they could have avoided that.
Yeah.
Maybe. And it's not 100%, but
nothing
geez,
is.
Nothing is. But the fact of the matter is, they do have trauma from those relationships because they were entered into without understanding themselves.
Here's the bottom line, and this is something that's been said to me, and I think that it sums it up really, really well. Being trans is only bad if you think that being trans is bad.
Exactly. The funny thing is I have my youngest daughter is she's ace, so she has no strong attraction, male or female. She just And one of the things that she says is, I'm so glad. She goes, I don't have to worry about whether I like a boy or a girl. I just am. She says, I don't even think about if I'm a boy or a girl. I just do my things and I don't think about it. She goes, and when guys think I'm hot because she's good looking, she's like, that's nice. Doesn't really do much for her, but that's nice. You can enjoy looking at me. It's all good. But she says it for her, it just takes out all of that that thing the rest of us that has hormones that are attracted to boys and girls and does the thing. It takes that hyper fixation on sex. Oh.
Well, I love the way the way that you're describing her, just sounds like pure confidence. So that's pretty awesome.
She, let's put it this way: when she was in junior high, the guys used to bug some of her girlfriends, some of her buddies, and she would lean in, and we had called her Lecter Spawn, as in Hannibal Lecter, because she's always been kind of very dark, and she looks at people, and you're like, I don't know if she's out to kill me or what. She's just one of these kids. You can't read her. She's just very dark. And so this guy was bugging one of her friends, and she leaned in, and she had a fork because it was lunchtime. And she puts the fork on the table and leans into him and says, if you don't stop annoying my friend, I'm going to find a pencil and put it. I'm not going to say where she was going to put it. And the way she just delivered it completely deadpan, the guy just got up, backed off, and left.
That's awesome.
She was known as the person you did not tick off.
There you go.
And I doubt she would have actually done anything, but she totally could just deliver that, just such emphasis and just the right that they just go, no, I'm out. But so yeah, but she's like, she's okay with people being attracted to her. She's just not interested most of the time unless she's attracted to them. I can't remember exactly what they call it's based on the person when you're ace, not their gender. It's about how you get to know them, and that's when you become attracted to the person, after you've gotten to know them and they become interesting to you as a person rather than as a ooh hot boy or ooh hot girl. That's the type of ace that she is.
Very cool.
And to me, that's awesome because it means it takes away from that idea of just being attracted via looks. So
Good for her. Anything else you wanted to add there, Tammy?
nope, that was it.
All right. Well, thanks for tapping in. I'm going to bring in one of our other regulars, Cassandra, and we'll see what Cassandra has to say next.
Hello.
How's it going?
Oh, it's going. I seem to have caught myself shingles.
Oh.
Yeah. I
You've got
started with
terrible luck.
pain in my leg, and then I thought I slept the wrong way. I didn't know what was going on. I had the worst case of sciatica, and then I started breaking out in a very painful rash and shooting. Yeah. Anyway, but other than that, that's not what I came here to talk about. I have a bad habit of when people ask me how I'm doing, I actually tell them.
That's okay.
But no, I'll tell you, there's so much I could say about this episode. But I would like to talk about this warehousing of homeless people. This is a topic I care deeply about, as well as, I often build myself as mostly a disability advocate, but unfortunately, disability and homelessness, they go hand in hand. You're at a much higher risk of homelessness if you're a person with disabilities. And that's just the way it is. But, it disturbs me. I mean, I worked in foster homes doing respite work in Vancouver, and one of my bosses is actually from Alberta. And he used to talk to me often about one of the things he didn't like about the Alberta system at the time was they just warehoused the kids. Like they had these big homes, they put them in and they just warehoused them. And often the kids weren't prepared to go out in the world once they aged out of care, and which leads to homelessness. And this is, again, what they're doing with the homeless population. Like these centers aren't housing anybody. You know what I mean? They're just wasting a lot of money. An example is doing it in Calgary is ridiculous. In Calgary, we got a place called Source. And if you're a person that is homeless or at risk of being homeless, you can go to Source. And that's been around for over a decade, Source has. And it's just all the different it's just all the different agencies that are out there together in one space, so somebody can just walk in and say, hey, I'm at risk of homelessness, or I am homeless, I don't know what to do, and then they try to coordinate resources. And it's been pretty good, but I think they've been probably overwhelmed in recent times. And there's difficulties. So them saying they're going to do this thing they done in Edmonton and Calgary is actually pretty ridiculous. They could just fund the one that already is here and that has proven to be way more effective than what they did in Edmonton. That would seem to me like a better course of action than trying to duplicate what they did in Edmonton here. The fact is you can't house people if you don't have houses to put them in. Our problem is that we do not have house. Well, actually, I should qualify that. We do not have housing that marginalized people can afford to live in. I cannot get an accessible apartment because to get an accessible apartment right now, a 1-bedroom, I'm looking at $1,700 to $2,200 a month.
Wow.
That's just for my accessibility needs. And I don't have the same level of accessibility needs as somebody in a wheelchair. And so like Jason Nixon just pisses me off. When I called his office, and all I can say about that person is like how they talked to me was some real sociopathic, psychopathic shit. I wasn't telling them about stats. I was relaying my story, what was happening to me step by step as I was trying to access all these different resources and what I was being met with. And this psychopath on the other end, without emotion, is telling me that I was lying to her, right? Oh, that's a lie. That's not true. There's plenty of rooms in the shelters. There wasn't. I'm a woman. I don't have any children, and I wasn't fleeing abuse. So that really narrows my options down to maybe there's some co-ed spaces, but those aren't safe. And even as such, I was going to agencies and they were outright telling me, we don't know what we can do for you. And I had multiple agencies, and what would happen is I would be referred in circles because they're all dealing with the same pot of resources. And they refer you back and forth to each other, but they're all still dealing with the same pot of resources. So it's this exercise in futility. But Jason Nixon would have you to believe something else, and he has somebody in his office that will gaslight you if you try to call in and get help and tell you that what your experience isn't really happening. So already we've got a problem. My dad had an expression: if the top isn't right, then nothing else is. And that is the case. The person in charge of community and social services is the last person on earth that should be allowed to have a ministry, be in charge of a ministry that deals with human lives, because he has no empathy, he has no compassion. This is a person that we all know about him being charged with the horse killing and the trespassing and assault of the property owner, who happened to be a woman. In both cases, he didn't fight those charges, and he has the money to do it. He didn't even fight them. He just pled guilty. And this is who we have looking after community and social services, making these horrible decisions, telling us that what we're experiencing and what's happening out there isn't really happening. It's somehow all our imaginations. Well, he does absolutely nothing and tells about money they're supposedly throwing at housing that's going to be built in 2 or 3 years when we have a housing emergency right now. And the fact that they're sitting there saying, oh, well, they've only housed 4 people out of all these referrals. That doesn't surprise me, because in order to house people, you have to have housing available to give them. And there isn't any.
Yeah.
And it just drives me absolutely batty. The other thing, that's my housing rant for the night. It's funny, like when I was listening to the whole trans thing, it drives me nuts. Like I grew up in a neighborhood that, the LGBTQ thing wasn't actually in our faces, but you knew well enough hanging out with your friends that, if you were from the LGBT community in any way, you didn't want to let them know about it, let alone your parents or anybody else's parents. And I know kids that went through hell because they couldn't come out to their friends or their family members. I know people that self-mutilated because their bodies did not seem and they had nobody to turn to. And I know kids that were beaten and kicked out of their home because they could not come out to their parents. And so this whole idea that I totally believe, like my daughter, I have the kind of relationship with my daughter. My daughter told me things that even while she was telling me, I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm glad you're telling me, but at the same time, it's not what I want to. I don't want to hear this because you're my daughter, But she knew it was a safe place that she could come to me, and I wasn't going to push anything on her. I was going to set out the facts and help her make an educated decision and support her through that. So she knew it was safe. Not every kid has that, and more than we realize. Like we like to say it's the tip of the iceberg, but and I do believe most parents are good, especially in this day and age. but it wasn't that long ago where that it would have been your statistic on the 1/3 versus 2/3 would have been the reverse.
Yeah.
No you know, it wasn't that long ago. And so to hear people trying to portray this, like people are trying to somehow groom your children when all they're trying to do is give a safe place for kids to figure out who they are. When you go through puberty, you have all sorts of feelings that you're trying to sort out. Even if you're a cis person, you still have a whole lot of feelings that you're trying to figure out at puberty, and it is very difficult. And if you don't have an adult or a parent that you can go to, you need to have somebody else. You need to have a safe space, right? Because if you don't, the results are tragic, and it just mortifies me that these people continue to, and that guy running the whole show at that thing, honestly, he's a disgusting human as far as I'm concerned. Like I don't even know what to say. But anyway, that's my speech.
No, thank you
for tonight.
I hope you feel better soon. I do want to say, because you gave me a point to kind of hop off of, and I didn't address this earlier. Even the language that's being used is bad. As I go to eloquent, and when I say that, I'm speaking particularly about the term, the use of the term grooming. So let's be clear. When we're talking about grooming, what we're talking about is a sexual predator who is over an extended period of time trying to create an environment and trying to reinforce behaviors that make that the subject, the object of their target, vulnerable to sexual assault. So when you talk about grooming, that's what you're talking about. And when you have people who use that term to say, I don't know, whatever the fuck they want, what that results in is diminishing that term, and it diminishes the reality of.
Yeah, you're watering down the reality of very real things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, no, I agree. Thank you so much, Cassandra. I'm going to bring in Progressive Albertan, I think I can never read the whole thing. So I'm going to bring them in, and then I'm going to open it up if anybody else wants to raise their hand, and we'll go from there. So Progressive Albertan, what's going on?
Hi. So I think I'll get started with Raki Pancholi. She endorsed Nenshi.
She sure did.
I'm a little saddened she endorsed Nenshi because all candidates have brought good ideas to the table. And it's sad to see that there's going to be less ideas being brought to the table at a time when there needs to be as many ideas as possible needed to be brought to the table.
I think she's going to keep bringing her ideas to the table, though. Like, I don't think I would not count Rocky or her team out of the policy and idea realm. I think that one of the things that would have had to exist in order for Rocky to A, endorse Nenshi, and B, become his executive chair, there had to be a conversation about, and I'm gonna come to the table so that I can be at the table.
I see that point, but there's also she can still create ideas with Nenshi, but having individual ideas and then coming all together and then discussing those individual ideas, I think will create a better NDP for the Alberta NDP in particularly. And what's the second thing? It's been a while.
It's been it's a 3-hour show. We're doing a Lord of the Rings show again, so I can understand why you might lose the thread a little bit.
Yeah. The pharmacare. That's a big thing. Danielle Smith basically said, screw the pharmacare, even though, if I remember correctly, I don't think there's many open options to the public outside of maybe a small group of people for coverage from the government, if I remember correctly.
There is a Blue Cross program that you can sign up with through the government of Alberta. It is not free. There is a monthly premium. There are deductibles anytime you use a service. So there are a lot of barriers to entry, and it's certainly not comparable to the free program that the feds are trying to offer.
Yeah, that's one of the programs maybe Smith was trying to like talk about, but like outside of that, there's not really much in Alberta, and for any drug coverage, and for contraceptives and diabetic medicine is something that it covers a wide range of Albertans right now.
Yep.
It could have covered a wide range of Albertans. I think Quebec also opted out of the plan, but if I remember correctly, they have their own sort of plan system. So, you can see them opting out so they can enhance their own plan.
Yeah, they do. They have a mandatory program that exists for anybody who stays in Quebec for, I want to say it's more than 6 months, but I could be wrong because I'm working from memory there. But there is a mandatory coverage plan that exists for the Quebecers, the Quebecois. So,
yeah. So, what else is there to touch on? Your interviews, they were pretty good. I had a look at them. I like the Mr. Lukaszuk's, what's the word? I can't remember the word, but I like Mr. Lukaszuk's overview of what the leaders do and how he views what the Alberta NDP is looking towards. I like how he put forward what he thinks, and I can't remember the words. Sorry.
That's all good. Thomas is the Honorable, I suppose. Mr.
Yes.
Lukaszuk is he's a fantastic speaker, but he's a former deputy premier. He's a former minister of like 6 or 12 or 50 things, and so I that's one of the things that I like about him.
Yeah, and I think another thing is with Pancholi endorsing Nenshi, could we see maybe other centrist candidates go for Nenshi? I think Mr. Gil McGowan, I think he called Nenshi, if he wins, he'll turn the party into a progressive conservative party
PC
2.0, which is, I don't think that's true, but all ideas are good, no matter if you think they're bad or good, they're still good to discuss.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that I like brainstorming. I know that when we've written some of the sketches for the show, we do a very much a brainstorming approach with the team, and it is very much okay, let's just throw everything into the middle of the room, and then we'll pick through and find the good stuff. I think that where one of the problems that exists, sticking with the theme of sort of tonight's show, one of the problems that exists where we go, well, no, everybody's ideas are valid and should be respected, and no. If it's a bad idea and you can demonstrate that it's a bad idea, then it's a bad idea. I do hope that we're able to get Mr. McGowan on the show. I would love to have the full set.
Yes, that'd be good.
Anything else you want to throw in there, man? I got one more speaker for the night, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think one more thing I'll add is about polling with the leaders. I think what I've seen with recent polling in Alberta with each of the leaders is, one leader or one of the leaders can't seem to satisfy both Calgary and Edmonton, which are the key cities needed for an NDP victory. I think some of the polls I've seen is with Nenshi as leader, they might dissatisfy some Edmonton voters, and with Hoffman as leader, it's going to dissatisfy a lot of Calgary voters. So I think there's something the NDP needs to work on, is satisfying both Calgary and Edmonton, and maybe as a bonus, parts of rural Alberta, because the NDP, without a leader, they're looking pretty hopeless right now, which is a little bit sad to say.
This is one of the reasons why I think the Rocky Pancholi move is so interesting and so significant, because there's no question. I mean, I think that the NDP did a good job, and I criticize the NDP all the time, but I think the NDP did a good job of timing their leadership race, because they've got 2.5, 3 years by the time this thing's done to introduce the new leader to all of the areas. But with the Nenshi Pancholi thing, Nenshi's, there's a lot of people, there's the vocal minority in Calgary. He's like, oh, I hate Nenshi so much, but they are a vocal minority. He was a 3-term mayor. And clearly the membership purchases speak to the enthusiasm that exists for him. But Pancholi also has a lot of leverage in Edmonton. And she's very, very good at interacting with the high profile, popular MLAs in Edmonton. So I think they've got a foundation that is going to be very, very interesting if Nenshi's successful in the leadership race.
Yeah, because I think what I've heard is like, from some people, it's like, Nenshi as leader, the Edmontonians won't vote for a Calgarian as leader, and vice versa. A Calgarian as leader will as Edmontonian as leader. Somebody from like the left wing, Edmonton, NDP, will Calgarians vote for them or whatever, which is a bit interesting to look at. But I guess we'll have to see after the leadership race if the polling for NDP rebounds back to what it was in maybe the 2023 general election.
I think it probably will. And I mean, if there was one thing that I would say to the NDP over the next 3 years is leave the shit posting to folks like us, because that was one of the biggest criticisms in the election. And if they, there's I look at accounts like Disordered YYC. I wish I could buy whoever runs that account, at the very least, a coffee, if not a delightful piece of pie, because those are the accounts that do such a good job of going through and finding all of the things. And I think that if the NDP runs a positive campaign, then the next election will be interesting to watch. But thanks for your thoughts tonight, man.
No problem.
All right, I'm going to bring in our last speaker. She's already here. So I'm just going to ask her to unmute herself.
Hey, Nate, how are you?
It's been a long show, Anna. I don't know how I'm doing over here.
Well, we're so thankful that you do these shows. At least I am, anyways.
Thank you. How are you doing tonight? Can I do a little introduction just for context? Because I want to make sure people know who Anna is. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Why not? I'm always interested to hear other people's thoughts on it.
I first was introduced to Anna Murphy way back in the run-up to the 2021 municipal election. I want to say it was 2020 that we first met. Anna is a politico. She is unbelievably smart when it comes to policy, and she is a tremendous advocate. She's also trans. She doesn't just say she's trans. I'm sorry, I had to make that joke.
Correct.
Yeah. No, Anna is trans. How's it going? Today's International Trans Day of Visibility.
It is International Trans Day of Visibility.
It's been a bit of a show. So I'm just like, what are your thoughts? What's going on?
It has been a little bit of a show, and I've been listening to bits and pieces of it, and obviously today is apologies, excuse me, and obviously today is it's an important day for so many reasons, but especially here within Alberta and Canada. Today holds even more particular meaning because of the misguided policies and guidelines that we saw proposed by Premier Smith, a few weeks ago here. And so, just touching, I think first on, the importance of Transgender Day of Visibility. And, we have two specific dates on the calendar that we take a moment to recognize throughout the year. One is Transgender Day of Visibility, and the other one is Transgender Day of Remembrance. And if you think of it, if we do a really good job of not only recognizing Transgender Day of Visibility, hopefully we can get to a point where we don't need Transgender Day of Remembrance. But sadly, for folks like the the current premier and members of her caucus and government, they seem pretty intent on doing what arguably it would be described as performative. Obviously, we know that these policies and guidelines have been proposed. We know that, there is a rollout. How they're going to be rolled out or delayed is basically an albatross around the neck of transgender, two-spirit, non-binary, gender-diverse Albertans. And what we saw from the Minister of Arts and Culture today was a post basically making a commitment to stand with transgender, two-spirit, non-binary, and gender-diverse Albertans, and the need to combat transphobia, which, if you think about it, is rather ironic considering the fact that one of the biggest perpetrators of transphobia in the province of Alberta right now is the government that she represents. So I think it's great that anyone would come out and recognize the importance of Transgender Day of Visibility and make such a very public commitment to stand with the community. However, when that person is someone who is an honorable member of the Legislative Assembly, a minister that has power and ability and sits at the cabinet table, I would perhaps maybe say that, today is a day to go beyond words and maybe put those words into action. Maybe, publicly condemn the proposed policies and guidelines, publicly condemn some of the comments that have been made by your colleagues, your backbench colleagues in the legislature. Perhaps maybe start there, and then maybe let's go on to the post, post about, your commitment and all of that. So, Transgender Day of Visibility is incredibly important, and, it's an opportunity to celebrate the existence of our transgender neighbors. And, you started off my introduction by saying I am transgender. Yes, I am transgender. It's not something I hide. It's not something that, for lack of a better term at this hour, Nate, I'll say pussyfoot around. Also being from rural Alberta, I feel like that's true to who I am.
Yeah.
It's not something I pussyfoot around. I am transgender. But first and foremost, I am a woman. And it's possible, much like you can have two significant occasions happening on the same date, i.e. Transgender Day of Visibility and Easter, a person can also be two things simultaneously at the same time. I can be a woman. I can be someone who's transgender. I can be someone who is born and raised and very much in tune with my rural roots, as much as someone who is a very proud, fiercely proud, some might say, Calgarian who loves the urban vibrancy that is the biggest city in Western Canada. So it's this whole thing that the world's not black and white. But you're right, I am transgender, and having been transgender, listening to some of the comments around, not even just on this show, but we often hear from folks, oh well, there wasn't as much transgender people, in my time. This seems to be a new thing. I think you were talking about it, it seems to be a trend. It seems to be the cool thing that kids are wanting to do. You're 100% right. There's nothing cool about this. It's not something that someone wakes up and decides, hey, this is going to get me popularity. This is going to get me fame. This is going to, get me farther ahead in life. In fact, we know within Canada, up to 40% of youth who are experiencing houselessness within this country are 2S LGBTQIA+. We know that transgender individuals within this country are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. So if this was the cool thing to do, if this was the trendy thing to do, you would not be seeing statistics such as those. But furthermore to that, the reason, why, this argument that we see some make about, oh my gosh, this is, that this is a fad, or, this is taking off like wildfire. It has to do with the reality that as a society, we have moved forward. We have done the hard work to bring progress forward. We have the people before me who were at, moments such as the Stonewall riots, which launched the 2S LGBTQIA plus civil rights movement, all the way through to, the marriage equality, all the way through to, blood ban and Bill C-16 federally and changing, the gender markers in 2016 under the Notley government here in Alberta. All of that. That was not a snap your fingers, here we are, it happened. That was a lot of hard-won progress for vulnerable individuals. And let's be quite clear, the work isn't done. In fact, we've barely got this progress, okay? We've barely made this progress. And already we see it being put to the test like never before. I can't recall, and granted, I'm not as old as the hills, but I don't think many of us can recall a time where human rights have been at such risk for one group of individuals in very recent memory. Of course, there are historical, examples that we can look to, but I'm talking recent. I'm talking like within the last, 20, 30 years, not farther. And so we've just brought forward this progress. We've just done so much work to build neighborhoods that are safe and welcoming and affirming, recognizing that by doing so for one group of vulnerable neighbors, it doesn't mean it's just for them. By doing the hard work to build neighborhoods that are safe, welcoming, and affirming, it does it for everybody. When we talk about human rights, we've all heard the saying, it's not pie. It's not like, we gave some human rights to the transgender individuals, so that means we're going to have to take some from this group or a little from that group. That's not how human rights works. By protecting and defending and being champions of human rights, it means for every single solitary individual in our neighborhoods who are vulnerable, who experience not just marginalization, but quite frankly get pushed to the margins of marginalization. So we've done some of that work, okay? We've done some of that heavy lifting and been there and made it happen. And that has led to the youth of today and even people who aren't youth, who maybe went through their life not feeling safe and welcome and affirmed in wherever they were in their life, to look around them and go, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can muster the courage and the resilience. I already have developed the resilience because I've been dealing with who I am in secret. So now I'm looking at the world around me and it looks like I can actually have the courage to come out, as we've all heard, coming out stories, and I can do so. And I can, there's a place for me. That's what we've told people, is that there's a place for them. There's a place for them in Calgary. There's a place for them in Alberta. There's a place for them in Canada. Now we're seeing that narrative shift drastically and dramatically, because quite frankly, and argue, I would argue that there are some who are feeling threatened by that. There are some individuals who feel that their privilege is somehow shrinking, and they want to do everything they can to hold on to it. And I think the other thing you mentioned tonight, the other group that keeps coming up, which quite frankly I am so fucking tired of this group of individuals, honest to God, but it's Take Back Alberta. Let's be very clear, folks. The premier of Alberta is taking marching orders from a group of individuals that is not elected. They do not go into the legislature. They're not even staff of the Legislative Assembly. And that is who our elected officials are basically taking their marching orders from. And again, can't recall a time in history. We like to talk, or especially some of my friends on the more conservative side like to talk about the glory days, right? We like to talk about the Peter Lougheeds and the Ralph Kleins, and these great statesmen, Brian Mulroney, who, just passed, God rest his soul, all these people, right? All these great statesmen. We're in a position where that doesn't exist anymore. You can't have great statesmen when the people that you're supporting aren't even actually the ones that are making the decisions, but rather it's a group of individuals that is in the shadows. It is so ridiculous right now. It is so ridiculous. So anyways, it's a little bit of a tangent and a little bit of a rant and a little bit of a divergence to this, but it's very clear to understand what is currently going on and how these policies and guidelines, which, let's be quite clear, are misguided. They are based in fallacious ideology. It is weaponized misinformation. And that's not me, Anna, the transgender person, the woke lefty, the progressive, whatever one wants to paint me. That is groups of medical professionals. That is groups of psychologists, doctors, lawyers, human rights experts, people who are far more intelligent and smarter than I am. And I'm not just saying, 5 or 10. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of individuals, professionals who have stood up, looked at these policies and guidelines, and said, this is factually false. This is false, what you are doing. But more so to that, besides the professionals, it's the everyday individuals. It's the young person that the day after these policies and guidelines were announced, they weren't in school the next day because they attempted to do a permanent action to what I sincerely hope is a temporary problem. It's the family member who tragically took their life, which we heard. You had Dr. Keegan on this show, Nate.
Yep.
It is those individuals that are being directly impacted by these policies and guidelines. These have real life consequences. So we've done all this work to build these safe and affirming communities and to bring this progress forward, to create a Alberta, a Canada, that folks look out and they go, that's where I want to go. That's where I want to create my home, because they're so welcoming. They're so friendly. They say sorry all the time. Well, unfortunately, it's a bit naive, right? It's like, because that's how we've got to this place. We kind of have this false sense of security. It's Canada. This can't happen here. It can happen in the States. It can happen in the UK. It can't happen in Canada. I've got bad news for everybody. It is happening. It is happening now, which is why it is so important that we recognize that on Transgender Day of Visibility, it's not just a day to make a post like what we saw the Minister of Arts and Culture do. Thank you for making a post. Quite frankly, I don't need your post. What I need you to do is, not this Tuesday because the House is currently on constituency break, but come Monday, a week from now, walk into the Legislative Assembly at 1:30 p.m. and stand up and give a ministerial statement and call on your boss. And when you do this, you're going to lose your role as minister. You're going to lose the position you have. But you know what? You're going to do something better. Something that we talk about, this great statesman, this moral courage, all of these different things, which quite frankly is lacking significantly in politics right now. You would do something. You would actually make your job that you have worth a goddamn thing. You would actually do something with it beyond just putting out a tweet or raising a flag when you have policies and guidelines that are costing people their lives. And the last thing, really quickly, Nate, I would just say, in terms of, as I said, when you started the introduction, I always love hearing what people have to say about me, because I've been called groomer, I've been called a pedophile, I've been called, a pervert, whatever it is. It's no different than back in the 80s and 70s, again, through the AIDS crisis, of how gay men were demonized and dehumanized as individuals. They were deemed to be the problem. We see this with groups throughout history that are othered or are perceived to be the problem. gay men throughout the AIDS crisis, Jewish people throughout the Holocaust, as well as communists and gays and homosexuals and transgender people, and basically anyone who is not the standard of the group that is out there wanting to, that has the power, right? So in this case, bad news for everybody, the group that has the power at the moment is a group of cisgendered, heterosexual, white Christian men. So if you are not a part of that group, okay, if you are not a part of that group, you will never be a part of that group. You will at times have value to that group to justify a means to their end, okay? And we've seen that also throughout history and throughout various different moments where groups will go and they will use and they will take. This is not a give and take relationship that we're in right now. This is a take relationship. They want to do anything they can to justify, right? And so that's what we've done. And so you hear people be called groomers. And again, this weaponized misinformation, fallacious ideology. Let's be very clear. The most important thing in the life of any child, transgender or otherwise, is a loving and supportive parent, family, friend, caregiver. Okay? Nobody is disputing that. I am not disputing that. But what we know is that sadly, again, I take you back to the stat that I gave. Up to 40% of youth who experience houselessness in Canada, across Canada, are 2S LGBTQIA+. Who kicked them out of their home? It wasn't me. It wasn't the government. It wasn't the teachers. It was parents. It was parents who, when that child found the courage to come out, was met with a parent that didn't want them and got rid of them. And that's sad and that's unfortunate, which is why it's so important that we have neighborhoods and a community that can rally around that child, okay? And so, you know, we're not grooming people. You can't force somebody, you know, again, to continue on and, you know, beat this, you know, rural analogy moment into the ground. You can't drag a horse to water and force it to drink, okay? This is something that people know. People know deep down in their heart and soul of who they are, and they know from a very early and young age. So the idea that anybody is forcing anyone to be transgender is fundamentally false. Or this idea that we need to protect the rights of parents. It's the children that have rights. It is the children that we need to protect, okay, and defend. Parents have responsibilities. So if you are, you know, if there is someone out there that's like, well, you know, I don't want my kid to do, you know, X, Y, and Z, and if they did, well, that is why your kid would not tell you what is going on. You very publicly have demonstrated that. And if they do, or if they did come out to you, then they would probably be met with a really sad and unfortunate situation. And so it's, again, today is Transgender Day of Visibility, and we have 365 some odd days until we're here again. And hopefully we can look back and think, you know what, we didn't stop. We didn't stop at midnight on, you know, on the next day. We carried on. We carried on standing up, speaking out, using whatever little bit of platform we have, if no other way than just, you know, starting by using affirming pronouns, or, you know, seeing someone in our circle and just letting them know that they are seen, they are valued, and they are loved. Because Nate, right now, myself included, we're scared. Transgender folks, we're scared, we're tired, and we're looking around and we're going, holy shit, right? Where does it stop? Where does it end? Because I go back to the example. We just got done working hard to get the progress that is now trying to be systematically stripped away and dismantled from us. And for anyone that says that will never happen, it is happening. So thanks, Nate. Rant over.
Thank you, Anna. I got to say, that was a fantastic rant. There's only one thing in there that you said that I take any kind of umbrage with. It's Z, not Z. I'm sorry. I have to point that out.
I was going to say, did I say Z?
You said XYZ. No, but here's the thing, and I wanted to end things on a slightly positive-ish note. I know that you're familiar with Dr. Christopher Wells. He's been curating a list of organizations that have come out against Smith's policies. So I just want to list off a few, and then I want to talk about the letter that was released. I think it was today. So if you are someone who's going, oh, maybe there's something in Smith's policies that makes sense, here's the people who say, some of the organizations who say no. We're talking about the Alberta Human Rights Commission. We're talking about the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. We're talking about the Canadian Human Rights Commission. We're talking about the University of Calgary and University of Alberta law faculties. We're talking about the Canadian Pediatric Society. We're talking about the Canadian Psychological Association. We're talking about the Children's Healthcare and the Pediatric Chairs of Canada. We're talking about the Canadian Medical Association. We're talking about medical associations across the country released by the Canadian Medical Association. We're talking about the Alberta Medical Association, the Alberta Medical Association Pediatrics Section, Alberta Psychiatric Association. I'm only on page 9 of 46. And the point that I'm going with this piece is that I'm only on page 9. And if you can look at the collective expertise, the collective knowledge, the collective, these are the organizations that specialize in what they do. If you can look at even that partial small list that I read off and go, yeah, but I think maybe I know better, you need to give your head a shake, is all I'm saying. The other thing that I wanted to highlight really quick as well as a positive thing is the letter that was released by, I struggle with this. I really do struggle with this. And I struggle with this because I saw these two when they played, and it was like a battle of the bands, and they played a stage at Mount Royal. And it was just when they were really starting to break. And they used to go by Sarah and Tegan, and that's what's embedded in my head. And then they switched it, and now I get it wrong all the time. Tegan and Sarah released a letter that specifically targeted the trans legislation that has been brought forward and the policies that have been proposed by Danielle Smith. And there's a lot of amazing artists who are who have co-signed on this. The surviving two members of Sharon, Lois, and Bram are calling Alberta out on this. Fred Penner is calling Alberta out on this. Neil Young, Katie Lang, Alanis Morissette. You could go on and on and on and on and on. And these people are not necessarily experts on the field of gender identity, gender incongruency. But what they're demonstrating is that they're willing to exercise some compassion and listen to the experts and the evidence. And that is all that I think anybody is asking. Exercise some compassion, listen to the evidence. And when you run into the fear mongers who are using the language of fear and the weapons of fear to try to further themselves, call them out. And if you're somebody who's not a direct target of these things, like Anna, as you were saying there, the group that is the main group are the cisgendered, white, middle-aged Christian men, and I fill almost all of those ticky boxes. I'm a lapsed Anglican, so I don't know if that counts or not. But if you're in those groups that have privilege, and this is, I hope, partially what we accomplished tonight. Part of your job, I think, is to do some of the fighting so that the people who are the targets don't have to always. It's not that hard. So, and I'm going to make the assumption that given that Anna didn't say, Nate, you shit the bed in a spectacular way tonight, that I didn't. But I'm open to the correction on that. And that's it. We're another 3-hour show. I'm going to break this up into 2 parts because asking anyone to sit through 3 hours is a whole awful lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of the speakers tonight on the Twitter Spaces or the X Spaces. I want to say particular thanks to Anna for that. I wouldn't call that a rant. That was just eloquent and passionate and good. So I want to say a big thank you to Anna for taking the time on this very important day for so many different reasons, for so many different people to share a little bit of time and speak so very well to those things. I want to thank you to everybody who's watching on the Facebooks, the YouTubes, the Instagrams, the things. We're on all the places now. And if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, thank you for listening to both parts, and leave a rating and a review, because if I've learned anything, it's that anytime we do one of these shows, the lists and the bots show up. So I'm sure our block list will double by the end of the week. Thank you, everybody, so much for taking the time to listen. And honestly, if there's anything that we've said here tonight that you disagree with or that you found to be inaccurate, our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you because, as I've said throughout the episode tonight, we try to get things right more than we get things wrong. So if you find something that we can get wrong and we can back it up, then we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Watch for the episode with disability advocate Dawn Slater coming later this week, and we will be back next Sunday. I mean, it's constituency weeks. That probably means like a whole lot of PR crap, so we'll probably have a lot of clips to play next week. But we'll be back next Sunday for another live episode. Look forward to seeing you then. Until then, keep the conversation going.